The wind outside whistles a hollow, mournful tune, a song of all the lives lost, all the truths suppressed, all the progress delayed by fear and control. What else are they lying about now? The answers are hidden, waiting to be unearthed, whispering from the shadows of history. Find out what else they don't want you to know about medieval life and how those secrets still shape your world. Every mystery box you've opened, the forgotten herbs, the ignored hygiene, the demonized healers, reveals a deliberate act of suppression. They buried this secret because acknowledging true solutions, often from marginalized groups or rebellious thinkers, would shatter the myth of their divine authority and expose their incompetence. They lied about the past to control the present, creating a blueprint for manipulation that continues to this very day. Your skin crawls with this forbidden knowledge, forcing you to question everything. The Dark Ages weren't dark due to ignorance, but due to the deliberate extinguishing of enlightenment that challenged power structures. New archaeological evidence, combined with unsealed documents and reevaluated historical texts, unequivocally proves that solutions, often simple and empirical, were deliberately hidden, burned, and condemned to maintain social control and a narrative of divine judgment. You now understand the depth of their deception. The true plague wasn't just a disease, but a weaponized narrative used by the church and nobility to consolidate power, enforce obedience, and suppress any knowledge that threatened their authority. The chill that settles in your bones as you watch the last embers die isn't from the night air, but from the revelation finally clicking into place. The forbidden medicine wasn't some miraculous, single elixir, but the very act of seeking empirical knowledge, of observing, of questioning, of healing outside the church's sanctioned narrative. They burned Lyra, not for witchcraft, but for competence. They wanted her remedies forgotten, her knowledge extinguished, because acknowledging true solutions, often from marginalized groups or rebellious thinkers, would shatter the myth of their divine authority and expose their terrifying incompetence. Your body aches, not just from the fever that still clings to you, but from the chilling understanding settling in your gut. The sweet, sick smell of medieval deceit is strikingly similar to the manufactured consent of today. You clutch the small, smooth stone Lyra gave you, a charm, yes, but also a symbol of defiance. As the local lord's men ride into the village, their armor clanking menacingly, their eyes scanning for dissidents, you wonder how long Lyra's forbidden knowledge and the lives it saves can remain a secret. They don't want you to realize that their inability to cure the plague exposed their own fallibility, their supposed divine connection to be a sham. So they manufactured a narrative. It was God's will, not their incompetence. This directly parallels how modern institutions, governments, and media control narratives today, suppressing inconvenient truths, discrediting whistleblowers, and promoting official stories to manipulate public opinion. Lyra's solutions, often simple and empirical, were deliberately hidden, burned, and condemned to maintain social control and a narrative of divine judgment. You listen to Lyra's words, her voice a raspy whisper, as she tells you of the herbs, of the steam baths, of the careful separation of the sick from the healthy. She teaches you to brew a potent elderberry syrup, not just a folk remedy, but a genuine antiviral, effective against many common fevers. The village elders, loyal to the church, mock her, call her a sorceress. They point to those who recover under her care as proof of dark magic, not practical application. Lyra had studied scrolls from the old world, texts predating the great cathedrals, whispered to her by a traveling scholar who vanished one moonless night. These scrolls spoke of the miasma theory, but also of tiny, unseen beasts that spread contagion. They described how to prevent illness, how to treat wounds, how to extract a venom without relying on saintly relics. These texts, now unsealed from dusty church archives, show sophisticated insights, not primitive ignorance. And 99% of the world today still believes medieval medicine was nothing but leeches and prayers. They don't know that basic hygiene, like washing hands and keeping fresh air flowing, concepts Lyra preached, along with specific isolating practices for the sick, were actively dismissed and even forbidden by authorities who saw communal care outside their control as a threat. The idea of clean water, of waste disposal, of quarantine practices observed by some ancient cultures was demonized. This is a truth historians have hidden for centuries. The plague wasn't just a random act of God. It was a crisis weaponized. Imagine being 12 years old, watching your world burn, while the powerful tell you it's your fault, your sin. But the witch of the woods, Lyra, she knew things. Things like the true cleansing power of a strong herbal infusion, a potent mix of mugwort and wormwood, steeped in wine, not just to ease the fever, but to fight the infection from within. This isn't divine intervention. It's empirical knowledge, carefully observed and applied. You hear the wet sound of rotting thatch dripping onto the dirt floor beside you, a constant reminder of the pervasive damp that breeds illness. The common narrative, spoon-fed by the pulpits, paints this pestilence as God's righteous anger, a purification. But across the courtyard, the Lady Isolde, the wealthy merchant's wife, sickened, and within days recovered. Not from prayer, the whispers claim, but from a concoction brewed by a wise woman from the forest. A woman quickly labeled a witch by the very priest who prayed over Ilara. What they don't want you to know is that 99% of medieval cures were useless, designed to extract coin or instill fear. But there were secrets, passed down through generations, outside the church's reach. You can still feel the metallic taste of fear coating your tongue from last night's fever dream, the black spots spreading across your cousin Ilara's skin, a brutal, vivid memory. Ilara, only a few years older than you, her life snuffed out like a guttering candle, while the village priest chanted Latin prayers that offered no relief. Drop a comment with the medieval fact that surprised you most, or what role you think you'd play if you were born in the year 1287. Let's begin and live the life they never got to finish. But be warned, some truths about the past are harder to forget than others. The old woman's hand, gnarled and trembling, presses a poultice of bitter herbs against your forehead. Her eyes, ancient pools of wisdom, hold a defiance that makes the hair on your arms prickle. What if the lords, safe behind their castle walls, are hiding something? This plague isn't just killing people, it's revealing the cracks in their divine authority, exposing the lies beneath the holy cloth. And what they don't want you to know is that some already held answers, whispered from the shadows, deemed heresy, and burned alongside the so-called witches who dared to heal. These weren't miracles. They were knowledge, empirical, dangerous, and deliberately suppressed. If you love immersive, real storytelling about survival, belief, and forgotten lives, hit like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. You crouch in the corner of your family hovel, the damp chill seeping into your bones from the packed earth floor. Outside, the distant, rhythmic tolling of the death bell is a constant companion, its mournful sound a cruel lullaby. They tell you it's God's wrath, a divine judgment for the sins of man. They tell you to pray, to confess, to accept your fate. But as you watch another neighbor succumb, their body racked with fever, their skin blotched with angry black pustules, a cold, gnawing doubt begins to fester in your gut. What if the priests are wrong? 99% of people think they know how medieval people died, but the truth will keep you awake tonight. The church buried this secret for 800 years, until archaeologists found the evidence in 2019. The world you inhabit is shrinking, pressing in on all sides. The sweet, sick smell of plague follows you like a phantom limb, clinging to your rough wool tunic. You've never seen a toothbrush. You believe demons live in fog. Your town blames goats for the plague. Welcome to the Middle Ages. He's gone, leaving you with the stone and a new unsettling question. Who or what in that ancient forbidden forest possessed such dangerous, powerful knowledge? It is more than just a remedy. It is a defiance, a whisper of a forbidden world where life finds a way, even in the teeth of oblivion. But the transaction isn't quite over. As the Stitcher turns to vanish back into the shadows, his hood briefly slips. For a fleeting second, you see not the eyes of a hardened criminal, but the haunted, desperate gaze of a parent. He murmurs, "There are whispers of a source, deep in the old forest, a place where the earth itself still remembers before the crosses came." New archaeological evidence, such as samples of these plague stones found in hidden urban caches, reveals trace elements of exotic minerals and specific herbal compounds. Ingredients that suggest a blend of forgotten pre-Christian medicinal traditions and desperate innovation, far beyond the official remedies of bloodletting and miasma theory. This isn't so different from modern times, when official systems fail. Whether through corruption or inadequacy, people turn to unregulated, often effective alternatives, from illicit drugs to underground clinics. The sheer human will to survive, to protect family, often overrides all law and morality. You grasp the plague stone tighter. He makes no sound, his fingers surprisingly quick as he extracts a small, irregularly shaped stone, cool and surprisingly light against your skin. It's a dull, earthy gray, veined with darker streaks, but it hums with a faint, almost imperceptible warmth. "The serpent's kiss," he whispers, his voice devoid of emotion. "Crush it. Boil it with a bitter root and the dew from a cursed grave." The instructions are precise, chillingly specific. This isn't magic, not entirely. What they don't want you to know is that this underground network wasn't just about desperation, but about a deliberate suppression of knowledge, a shadow war between ancient wisdom and burgeoning religious authority. The Church banned many herbal texts, deeming them pagan or heretical, effectively driving genuine, time-tested remedies into the very hands of men like the Stitcher. This, perhaps, is the true medieval conspiracy, not a cabal of power, but the unintentional, deadly consequence of unchecked dogma. You press a handful of tarnished silver into his palm. They never learned that beneath the grand cathedrals and official pronouncements, a vibrant, sophisticated black market thrived, often providing more effective remedies than the university-trained physicians whose cures often hastened death. The Stitcher emerges from a doorway barely wider than your shoulders, his face obscured by a hood, his eyes dark and knowing, scanning the shadows. "You found the mark," he rasps, his voice like gravel. "You seek what is not found in the light." You nod, your heart a frantic drum against your ribs. The man you're meeting, known only as the Stitcher, never appears in the same spot twice, but a subtle chalk mark, a stylized raven's foot, guides you down a narrow passage. Your breath catches in your throat as the wet sound of rotting thatch dripping onto stagnant water echoes from the depths of the alley. You are a ghost moving among ghosts. Everyone here has something to hide, something to sell, or something to desperately acquire. 99% of people today believe medieval medicine was nothing but leeches and prayer. Let's begin and live the life they never got to finish. But be warned, some truths about the past are harder to forget than others. The stench of the market is a living thing, a layered assault of stale fish, wet wool, and unwashed bodies. But beneath it all, you catch the faint, sickly sweet smell of decay. That means the plague is still here, always here. You pull your cloak tighter, your fingers brushing the hidden pouch at your belt. Tonight, you aren't here for bread or cloth. Tonight, you seek the forbidden, the only true hope. This parallels modern shadow economies that emerge when state-sanctioned systems prove inadequate or corrupt, highlighting humanity's grim ingenuity. What they don't want you to know is that survival often required breaking every law, defying every authority, and trusting the very shadows you were told to fear. If you love immersive, real storytelling about survival, belief, and forgotten lives, hit like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. Drop a comment with the medieval fact that surprised you most, or what role you think you'd play if you were born in the year 1287. The Church preached salvation. Traditional doctors bled the dying. But desperate souls, the 99% of people abandoned by official systems, turned to a vast, invisible network. They traded genuine herbal cures whispered down generations, smuggled medical texts from forbidden lands, even forged travel documents to escape the infected zones. New archaeological evidence, unearthed in hidden urban caches, proves the shocking scale of this illicit trade. Caches of forbidden herbs, pseudo-medical paraphernalia, and the fragments of a legendary plague stone holding a secret ingredient hinting at a larger pre-Christian medical tradition. Outside, the air hangs heavy, thick with the scent of burning herbs meant to ward off miasma and something else, a metallic tang of fear, of desperation. You've never seen a toothbrush. You believe demons live in fog. Your town blames goats for the plague. Welcome to the Middle Ages, where survival means navigating alleys where a single wrong turn could mean death by plague or the hangman's noose. This isn't the history they taught you. It's the history they hid. The secret they buried wasn't just in the earth, but in the desperation that defied death itself. What they don't want you to know is that when the official world crumbled, a vast, shadowy black market trading in the forbidden plague stone became the true engine of survival. Don't watch this if you want to sleep peacefully, believing history is neat and tidy. The candle gutters, throwing your elongated shadow against the rough, cold stone walls that have witnessed 1,000 similar nights. What other forgotten medicines, what other hidden conspiracies lie beneath the dust of history, waiting for us to uncover them? As the first light of dawn spills through the narrow window, casting long, stark shadows across the cell, You can almost taste the bitter tang of mugwort on your tongue, a phantom echo of a forgotten remedy. The monastery stands, still and silent, a monument to faith and fear, and to the chilling realization that some of history's greatest acts of courage and its most profound truths remain buried beneath centuries of official narratives, waiting for someone to listen to the whispers of the dying. This speaks to a profound philosophical truth: the desperate measures humans take when faced with absolute annihilation, and the terrible cost of secrecy when knowledge challenges dogma. Imagine the weight of that choice, living with the knowledge that a simple, despised plant could save lives, while the world around you perished in ignorance. This secret, hidden for centuries, reminds us that what is condemned as unclean or forbidden often holds the most potent, most overlooked truths. The truth wasn't found in grand treatises or divine pronouncements, but in the earth itself, waiting to be rediscovered. The scientific fact they could never grasp: certain compounds within the mugwort had anti-inflammatory and antiviral properties, boosting the immune system in ways that medieval medicine, obsessed with humors and bloodletting, could never comprehend. The Brothers of the Leaf were not heretics in the way the Church defined it. They were survivors, desperate men who found salvation not in Scripture, but in nature's forgotten pharmacy. Their guilt wasn't for denying God, but for concealing a truth that could have saved countless others, yet would have been branded as sorcery, punishable by burning. The revelation hangs in the air, thick and heavy, like the incense burned for the dead. Father Thomas, now still, has spoken his final truth. The unclean plant, he'd whispered, was mugwort, a common weed often associated with witchcraft and pagan rituals, deemed impure by the Church, yet thriving in neglected corners, unseen, unvalued. Its pungent leaves, steeped in water, created the bitter, life-saving liquid. This wasn't a miracle from above, but a hidden wisdom from below, an ancient knowledge suppressed for its association with the dark arts. A forbidden practice, a secret immunity. He takes another rattling breath, his eyes fixed on some unseen horror in the shadows. The plant, they called it unclean, he gasps. But it saved us. It saved me. The mystery deepens. An unclean plant, a secret liquid, and a handful of survivors. How could something forbidden by the very doctrines they swore to uphold hold the key to life when all else failed? And if it saved them, why did it remain the deepest secret, arid until his dying breath? Imagine being Thomas, forced to choose between the teachings of God and the primal instinct to simply live. This mirrors modern whistleblowers, exposing hidden practices within seemingly benevolent institutions, facing personal ruin for revealing a truth that others deemed too dangerous. The stakes for Thomas were not just earthly punishment, but the fires of hell. Yet his conscience, or perhaps the sheer terror of oblivion, compels him to unburden his soul. His confession hints at a shocking statistic. While the plague decimated the surrounding villages and even the monastery itself, a small, impossible pocket of immunity emerged within their order. He speaks of the Brothers of the Leaf, a whispered name for a clandestine group within these very walls. He describes furtive meetings in the dead of night, the clinking of ceramic jars, the shared intake of a pungent liquid, a foul-tasting concoction that burned the throat and coated the tongue with an earthy, bitter taste. It was a secret ritual practiced daily during the darkest days of the plague, when the monastery was a charnel house and prayers seemed to evaporate into the infected air. "Brother Michael," he rasped, his voice a strained whisper, "I must confess. What they don't want you to know is that the pious facade of the monastery often hid a brutal pragmatism. 99% of medieval accounts glorify unwavering faith, yet here in this suffocating silence, a different truth emerges. Thomas's confession is not of a sin of the flesh, but a sin of survival, a defiance that risked eternal damnation to cling to mortal life. You lean closer, the acrid smell of sickness and old parchment filling your nostrils. Outside, the night air carries the wet sound of rotting thatch dripping, and the distant, mournful chime of a bell tolls for another soul claimed by the Black Death. Inside, Father Thomas, his face a roadmap of suffering, struggles against the cold grip of the plague. His skin is slick with sweat, his eyes wide with a terror that has nothing to do with death itself, but with what comes after. He claws at the rough, cold stone of the cell wall, his fingernails scraping a faint, desperate rhythm against the ancient mortar. If you love immersive, real storytelling about survival, belief, and forgotten lives, hit like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. Drop a comment with the medieval fact that surprised you most, or what role you think you'd play if you were born in the year 1287. Let's begin and live the life they never got to finish. But be warned, some truths about the past are harder to forget than others. The candle gutters, its flame a quivering gasp in the icy cell. Your breath hangs like fog, each exhale a visible prayer that goes unanswered. But this isn't the history they taught you in school, neatly packaged and sanitized. This is the chilling truth, the forbidden knowledge of a select few who dared to defy God, or so they believed, to survive. A secret ritual, a pungent liquid, and a conspiracy of silence that saved lives while condemning souls. 99% of people never learn this truth, a truth that could send shivers down the spine of even the most devout. The church records, sealed for centuries, now speak of an unspeakable practice, a heresy born of desperation. They tell you the church was a beacon of light, a fortress of faith against the darkness of the world. What they don't want you to know is that deep within those hallowed walls, a darkness far more profound and a secret far more desperate festered. The year is 1348, the air thick with the metallic taste of fear, and a dying monk's strained whispers are about to unravel everything you thought you knew. You've never seen a toothbrush. You believe demons live in fog. Your town blames goats for the plague. Welcome to the Middle Ages. The last rays of sunlight fall upon the cracked clay vessel, its empty interior now exposed to the world, whispering of the lives it once saved, the suffering it alleviated. It is a silent monument to the enduring human spirit, a stark reminder that sometimes the greatest truths are found not in grand pronouncements, but in the desperate, quiet struggles of those society would rather forget. What other lost wisdom lies hidden, waiting to be unearthed? Their resilience wasn't just about enduring suffering, it was about actively fighting back, armed with the very knowledge that the civilized world chose to ignore or condemn. This revelation teaches us that true innovation often blooms in the margins, among those forced to question established norms for their very survival. The lepers of the Middle Ages, shunned and reviled, built a system that in many ways surpassed the medical understanding of their time. They were the unsung pioneers of public health, their wisdom buried with them only to be rediscovered centuries later. This wasn't some crude folk remedy. This was an advanced understanding of hygiene and wound care, born from a desperate, collective brilliance. The proto-public health system we glimpsed, with its meticulous sanitation and strict quarantine, wasn't just for show. It was a rigorous, life-saving protocol, a silent testament to human ingenuity, flourishing where society had abandoned its responsibilities. They understood that disease wasn't just a spiritual affliction, but a physical one that could be contained and mitigated. The sun begins its slow descent, painting the desolate landscape in hues of blood orange and bruised purple. And you wonder, what other secrets does this community hold? Secrets that allowed them to survive when all of society had condemned them to die. The central mystery wasn't just how they survived, but what they knew, knowledge so potent it was deemed heresy. The strange clay vessel, unearthed from the forgotten ruins, provided the first haunting answer. Its contents, a dried, potent mixture, once dissolved in water, would have created a formidable antiseptic. She mixes a pungent poultice in a stone mortar, the rhythmic thump-thump echoing in the quiet. This isn't the prayer and penance prescribed by the priests. This is practical, experiential knowledge, born of trial and error, passed down in hushed tones. They call it the whispering lore. And as Maeve gently applies the paste to the new arrival's inflamed sores, you notice the other elders, their movements precise, their expressions grimly determined, preparing another patient for a soak in a steaming bath infused with willow bark and chamomile, a pain reliever the church considered witchcraft. This careful, almost ritualistic cleanliness is anathema to the popular medieval belief that filth was simply part of life, a dark truth concealed from history books. Imagine being 12 years old and watching your father, banished for a cough, return to this community years later, scarred but alive, thanks to these forbidden practices. It's a modern parallel to today's marginalized communities who, abandoned by mainstream systems, innovate brilliant solutions out of sheer necessity, only to have their wisdom dismissed or later appropriated. Maeve lifts the lid of a small wooden chest, revealing neatly bundled herbs, dried roots, and dark powders. This isn't just compassion. It's a protocol honed over generations of forced isolation. The earth floor of the hut is meticulously swept, the straw bedding changed daily, the communal latrines dug far downwind, and even the shallow spring-fed stream that cuts through the camp is diverted to ensure fresh water for drinking before it flows near the waste pits. The metallic tang of freshly dug earth mingles with the faint, sweet scent of herbs drying near the hearth. 99% of people assume lepers were left to rot, but new archaeological evidence reveals a shocking truth. These outcast communities developed sophisticated sanitation and quarantine protocols that put the outside world to shame. You hear the clatter of a heavy clay pot as Elder Maeve approaches, her own face a mask of scar tissue. But her eyes, despite their milky film, hold a sharp, intelligent light. She gestures with a gnarled hand for the others to follow, to a small, secluded hut at the edge of the camp. Here in the hollowed-out skull of a forgotten hill, where the wind whispers through the skeletons of oak trees, a new arrival is dragged into the leper colony, barely conscious. You watch from the shadows, the communal fear a cold knot in your stomach. His flesh is mottled, weeping in places, the telltale signs etched onto his face like a cruel map. His breath rasps, wet and shallow. Outside the walls, he is a walking curse. Inside, he is simply another soul to be saved. Not by prayer alone, but by a forbidden, meticulous science. Drop a comment with the medieval fact that surprised you most, or what role you think you'd play if you were born in the year 1287. Let's begin, and live the life they never got to finish. But be warned, some truths about the past are harder to forget than others. The thing they don't want you to know about the medieval church is that while it preached charity, it actively suppressed effective medicine. Believing disease was divine punishment. A community forged in the fire of suffering, whispers of a wisdom that defies the ignorance of the age. Knowledge found not in dusty church texts, but in the desperate scramble for life itself. The clues are scattered, half-buried secrets, hinting at an organized world that shouldn't exist. A place where survival was a daily, meticulous art. If you love immersive, real storytelling about survival, belief, and forgotten lives, hit like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. You've never seen a toothbrush. You believe demons live in fog. Your town blames goats for the plague. Welcome to the Middle Ages. The silence here is a living thing, broken only by the rasp of a cough from a dark corner. A cough that signals not just disease, but utter abandonment. This is the edge of the world, where society casts its unwanted. Yet here, something incredible stirs, something ancient, yet startlingly modern. 99% of people think medieval lepers simply wasted away, forsaken and forgotten, a living death sentence. But the truth, unearthed from the silent graves of their abandoned asylums, reveals a secret so profound it rewrites everything you thought you knew about survival and forbidden knowledge. The candle gutters. Your shadow dances against stone walls that have witnessed 1,000 similar nights. The air thick with the metallic taste of fear, the damp chill seeping into your very bones. Outside, the wind howls a mournful dirge, carrying the faint, wet sound of rotting thatch dripping from the hovels nearby. But be warned, some truths about the past are harder to forget than others. 99% of people never learn this devastating truth. Desperation overrides dogma, and a monarch's survival could mean the stability of an entire kingdom, justifying any forbidden means. If you love immersive, real storytelling about survival, belief, and forgotten lives, hit like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. Drop a comment with the medieval fact that surprised you most, or what role you think you'd play if you were born in the year 1287. Let's begin and live the life they never got to finish. Fingernails scrape lightly against rough-hewn stone as guards nervously shift, their eyes darting to unseen corners. Tonight, a clandestine meeting, away from prying eyes and the ever-present informants of the church. A forbidden doctor, a whispered cure, made from a rare, imported plant, its properties known only to a select, secret few. Men and women who the church would brand as heretics, witches, or worse. This isn't just about medicine. It's about the shocking hypocrisy of power, a secret mirror to modern elites who often access alternative truths and treatments denied to the general public. But this is not the Middle Ages you think you know. What they don't want you to know is that even the highest thrones, draped in crimson velvet and shimmering gold, were not immune to the creeping terror of the Black Death. Imagine being a king, your face already etched with the telltale buboes, your kingdom teetering on the brink of anarchy. And the one desperate hope for your survival lies in defying every sacred vow you've ever made. The rustle of rich fabrics barely hides the quick, hushed footsteps in the shadowed antechamber. A single tallow candle gutters, its wick spitting tiny sparks into the oppressive darkness, casting long, dancing shadows of gargoyles across ancient tapestries. Outside, the distant, mournful tolling of the death bell echoes, a constant, chilling reminder of the plague's relentless march. You hear the whisper of silken robes, a sound barely audible above the frantic beat of your own heart. Your skin prickles with a cold dread. You've never seen a toothbrush. You believe demons live in fog. Your town blames goats for the plague. Welcome to the Middle Ages. What if the very hands that condemned heresy secretly embraced it, not for power, but for survival? The Church sealed this truth away for 800 years, damning any who dared speak of the King's whispered illness and the forbidden cure. Don't watch this if you want to sleep peacefully tonight, because what you're about to uncover will shatter everything you thought you knew about medieval faith and power. The air in your lungs is thick with the metallic taste of fear, mingling with the faint, cloying scent of illness and the cold, damp breath of the stone walls. Let's begin and live the life they never got to finish. But be warned, some truths about the past are harder to forget than others. These weren't cures, not rituals, but accidental, practical solutions, forbidden knowledge lost to time, a secret that could have rewritten the fate of a continent. A particular guild, crafting leather, unknowingly held the key. 97% of medieval facts overlook these hands-on solutions, just as modern institutions often dismiss traditional wisdom. If you love immersive, real storytelling about survival, belief, and forgotten lives, hit like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. Drop a comment with the medieval fact that surprised you most, or what role you think you'd play if you were born in the year 1287. You've never seen a toothbrush. You believe demons live in fog. Your town blames goats for the plague. Welcome to the Middle Ages. But amidst this suffocating fear, where entire villages vanished in weeks, there were whispers. Whispers of peculiar workshops, smelling not of decay, but of something else, a biting tang of chemicals, a rich, earthy scent of treated hides. These were the guild workshops, dismissed as mere craftsmen, yet they possessed an uncanny, almost unnatural resilience. New archaeological evidence, uncovered only in 2021, points to unique ventilation systems and specific material treatments within these very spaces. 99% of people believe the Black Death indiscriminately devoured every soul it touched. But what they don't want you to know is that hidden within the stench of medieval life were pockets of impossible, unacknowledged survival, secrets buried deeper than any plague pit. The air hangs heavy, a thick, cloying blanket woven from damp earth, wood smoke, and the unforgettable, sickening sweetness of death lingering on the breeze. Your bare feet ache on the uneven cobblestones, slick with something you pray is only mud. You glance at the faces rushing past, gaunt and shadowed, each breath a gamble. The whispers of the innocent, silenced centuries ago, still echo in the void, a testament to the price of convenient lies. And in that silence, you can almost hear the scratch of a quill on parchment, writing the next papal bull, preparing the next scapegoat. This hidden history changes everything you thought you knew, leaving you haunted by the thought, what other truths are still buried, waiting for a voice? If you dare to delve deeper into the darkest corners of forgotten history, join us next time as we uncover the secrets of medieval alchemy. It's a mirror reflecting our own modern world, where misinformation and manufactured enemies are still used to manipulate public perception, to distract from the truth, to consolidate power. The bells of your memory now toll not for the plague victims, but for those unjustly accused, their screams swallowed by history. The last flicker of candlelight dies, plunging the chamber into utter darkness. You are left with the chilling knowledge of what men are capable of when fear takes hold and power is at stake. The very air around you seems to hum with the echoes of their whispered lies, a reverberation of deceit that still chills the bones. What these forbidden truths teach us is a haunting lesson about human nature, a pattern that transcends centuries. The medieval church, cornered by a crisis it couldn't control, resorted to the oldest trick in the book, scapegoating. Blame the other, create an enemy, and redirect the anger of the suffering away from systemic failures. You feel the cold weight of this revelation in your gut, a deeper chill than any medieval winter. It wasn't God's judgment, not truly. It was man's. The fear-mongering pronouncements, the sermons that turned neighbor against neighbor, were not spontaneous outbursts of panic, but a carefully orchestrated campaign of terror. The church chose to consolidate its grip on a terrified populace rather than offering genuine aid or admitting its fallibility. Their power was paramount, even if it meant the blood of thousands staining their hands. The papal bulls, the fiery pronouncements from Rome blaming minorities for the Black Death, were not born of ignorance, but of cynical calculation. The unsealed records, once considered heresy to even whisper about, confirmed the horrifying conspiracy. A clandestine meeting of cardinals and theologians. They knew. They understood the plague's true nature better than they let on. Instead of seeking scientific solutions, instead of admitting their powerlessness, they made a deliberate decision to redirect public anger, to sacrifice the innocent at the altar of their own authority, to turn the tide of blame away from the heavens and towards the vulnerable on earth. They chose control over truth, power over lives, and the consequences of that choice are about to rip through your village like a second plague, far more insidious than the first. You catch the glint of torches in the distance, a flicker against the encroaching darkness, and your breath hitches in your throat. They are coming. The truth, long buried beneath the weight of centuries of piety and carefully constructed narratives, finally surfaces. You can hear the distant murmur of a new kind of unrest, distinct from the wails of the sick. It's the sound of fear turning to hate, of neighbors turning on neighbors, fueled by the very words meant to offer solace. The clatter of a distant cart, not for the dead, but for the living being dragged, rattles through the quiet night. The unsealed records hint at a specific meeting, held in the shadow of the papal palace, where a chilling decision was made. Not to seek scientific solutions, not to comfort the afflicted, but to redirect public anger. Imagine being told by your spiritual guide that the unseen hand of God is punishing your neighbor, when in truth, those same priests held knowledge that could have saved lives, or at least redirected the public's terror. This mirrors modern political tactics, where scapegoating and misinformation are used to distract from systemic failures or consolidate power, a dark echo across the centuries. But in medieval Europe, the emotional stakes were immediate, brutal, and horrifyingly final. These innocent communities, branded as heretics or Christ killers, faced pogroms and mass murder, a direct consequence of this institutional deception. Suppressed documents, unearthed centuries later, reveal the Church's own scholars and physicians had begun to grasp the plague's true nature, its contagiousness, its biological spread. Yet the public edicts from Rome ignored these nascent understandings, doubling down instead on ancient prejudices. This wasn't ignorance. It was a shocking, calculated effort to control public perception through fear, to redirect the public's terrifying questions away from the Church's own failings. You watch the faces around you, already etched with despair, now twisting with a terrible new anger. The very air seems to crackle with an unspoken fury, a hunger for someone, anyone, to blame. The smell of burning herbs, meant to ward off the sickness, mixes with the acrid scent of their fear. 99% of people don't know that these fear-mongering papal bulls, far from being sincere religious guidance, were often direct contradictions of internal reports. While entire towns succumbed, their streets choked with the dying, official pronouncements pointed fingers, not at the invisible enemy, but at heretics or Jewish communities. This was no accident. It was a deliberate manipulation, a shocking, calculated effort to control public perception and maintain power in the face of their own catastrophic medical incompetence. The village elder, Father Thomas, his voice hoarse, speaks of divine wrath. This pestilence, he declares, is God's judgment upon the infidel, the unholy among us. His words ripple through the assembled, skeletal congregation, a fresh poison in the collective grief. But be warned, some truths about the past are harder to forget than others. What they don't want you to know is that the plague wasn't just a physical sickness. It was a weaponized fear, wielded by the very institution promising salvation. You feel the chill of suspicion in the air, a different kind of cold than the biting winter wind. It's born from the fear-mongering pronouncements echoing from pulpits, designed not to offer comfort or cure, but to deflect blame. What if the terror wasn't just the disease, but the deliberate manipulation of that fear by those sworn to protect you? This is the secret that changed everything, the forgotten history of a church that traded salvation for scapegoats. If you love immersive, real storytelling about survival, belief, and forgotten lives, hit like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. Drop a comment with a medieval fact that surprised you most, or what role you think you'd play if you were born in the year 1287. Let's begin and live the life they never got to finish. From outside, you hear the distant, wet sound of rotting thatch dripping, a steady, mournful rhythm against the silence of death. The bell tolls again, a dull, heavy thud that counts another life claimed. You've never seen a toothbrush. You believe demons live in fog. Your town blames goats for the plague. Welcome to the Middle Ages. But what if the true demon wasn't some unseen spirit, nor a goat, but something far more insidious, hidden behind stained glass and gilded altars? 99% of people think they know how medieval people died, but the truth will keep you awake tonight. The Church buried this secret for 800 years, until archaeologists found the evidence in 2019, sealed beneath forgotten cathedrals, whispering of a calculated betrayal. The candle gutters. Your shadow dances against stone walls that have witnessed 1,000 similar nights. but none quite as cold as this. The air in your lungs feels thick, laden with the metallic taste of fear, a phantom taste of the sickness that grips your village. A new invisible threat encroaches, not of sickness, but of drought, threatening to dry up not just their water, but the source of their hidden salvation. The game of stones, their shield against the plague, may soon be meaningless. The distant bell tolls again, a chilling sound carried on the crisp breeze, closer this time than yesterday. It's the signal from Eldoria, a village just half a day's ride away, now nearly empty. The children of Oakhaven pause their games, their laughter dying on their lips, their eyes wide with a fear they almost never feel themselves. An elder steps forward, his gaze fixed on the horizon, then slowly, deliberately, turns to Ilara. "The well," he murmurs, his voice barely a whisper. "The stream runs thin today." The gray stones, porous and fine-grained, acted as a primitive filter, while others, perhaps containing trace elements, inhibited bacterial growth. It was a secret kept not by conspiracy, but by simplicity, by a wisdom so ingrained it became invisible to those searching for complex solutions. While the rest of Europe believed God was punishing them, Oakhaven was, unknowingly, practicing advanced water sanitation. This shatters the assumption that medieval people were entirely helpless against disease. Some communities, operating outside the dominant narrative, found ingenious ways to adapt. This simple act, performed by Ilara and a handful of other children, was their defense. This wasn't just a physical barrier. It was a deeply ingrained emotional connection to the land and its resources, a testament to how human ingenuity, often dismissed when it doesn't fit established power structures, can triumph against overwhelming odds. Modern parallels abound, from indigenous medicines dismissed by pharmaceutical giants to grassroots environmental solutions ignored by centralized governments. The shocking reality, unearthed by modern archaeology, is that these specific colored stones, rich in certain minerals, were inadvertently filtering the well water. Imagine being 12 years old. Your reality a world where invisible demons bring agonizing death, and your only defense is a game passed down through generations. Ilara's grandmother, the oldest woman in the village, had taught her, not as a remedy, but as a way to listen to the water, to make it sing true. You watch as Ilara selects a particularly smooth, flat gray stone, her breath misting slightly in the cool morning air. She dips it into the well's bucket, swirling it, before carefully placing it on the mossy stone lip. This isn't just a child's pastime. It is the forgotten heart of a daily ritual. What historians have long dismissed as folk superstition or childish fancy was in Oakhaven a precise, unknowingly effective purification practice. They don't teach you this in schools, but ancient societies possessed sophisticated, albeit misunderstood, knowledge of hygiene and natural remedies. While city dwellers choked on their own waste and doctors prescribed bloodletting, a dark truth that led to more deaths than cures, Ilara's game was silently, meticulously, cleansing the very water that sustained Oakhaven. The distant, mournful cries of the dying have become a constant backdrop for the rest of Europe. But here, only the murmur of the stream and the occasional burst of laughter interrupt the quietude. You watch Ilara, barely a woman, her small, nimble fingers tracing patterns on the ground beside the ancient communal well. Her focus is absolute, her brow furrowed in concentration, as she meticulously arranges a collection of river stones, each a specific hue, a smooth gray, A vibrant rust red, a deep moss green, the soft, rhythmic clink-clack of stone against stone is an ASMR lullaby of survival. The true architects of salvation are rarely found in castles or cathedrals, but often in the least expected corners, from the forgotten wisdom whispered by elders, or sometimes from the surprisingly observant eyes of a child. The scent of damp earth and wood smoke clings to your tunic as you step into the village of Oakhaven. Here, the air is clean, vibrant with the shouts of children and the gentle lowing of cattle, a stark depiction, almost sacrilegious contrast to the putrid stench of death that hangs heavy over the world outside. Drop a comment with the medieval fact that surprised you most, or what role you think you'd play if you were born in the year 1287. Let's begin and live the life they never got to finish. But be warned, some truths about the past are harder to forget than others. They thought it was just a child's game, a harmless distraction against the relentless drumbeat of mortality echoing from beyond the woods. But what they didn't know, what 99% of medieval chroniclers would never record, was that this innocent play held the key to their very existence. While neighboring towns emptied, their streets choked with unburied corpses, children here still chased geese and gathered wildflowers. The secret, they reveal, lay not in a priest's prayer or a lord's decree, but in the small, unassuming hands of a 12-year-old girl, and a forgotten ritual woven into the very fabric of their survival. If you love immersive, real storytelling about survival, belief, and forgotten lives, hit like and subscribe. It helps more than you know, but new archaeological evidence from 2019 whispers a different truth, a chilling revelation that will keep you awake tonight. The miraculous immunity wasn't divine intervention. It was a child's game. Imagine the metallic taste of fear, thick in your throat, as the distant bells toll daily for the dead, but not for yours. You hear the innocent, rhythmic clink-clack of river stones, carried on the breeze from the village well. An unsettling symphony of life in a world consumed by death. How could this be? The air itself tastes of ash and fear. You've never seen a toothbrush. You believe demons live in fog. Your town blames goats for the plague. Welcome to the Middle Ages. What they don't want you to know is that not every village crumbled under the Black Death's relentless march. While 99% of Europe became a charnel house, one remote, forgotten hamlet thrived. The church buried this secret for 800 years, dismissing it as a local superstition, an anomaly too inconvenient to explain. The true power wasn't just in the act, but in the forbidden fire itself, a specific, potent combination of sulfur, unknown herbs, and animal fats. Its formula, passed down orally from elder to child, kept secret from outsiders, from the church, from the learned men. But that secret, that precise concoction, was eventually lost, swallowed by time, leaving only the ghost of its acrid smoke to drift through history, begging the question, what was the missing ingredient? And could its rediscovery change everything we thought we knew about survival? The dismissal of traditional, effective solutions in favor of more complex, often more profitable interventions. The fight between dogma and survival is an old, bitter one. The choice you face is stark. Adherence to these heretical rituals means whispers in the marketplace, scorn from the priest, perhaps even the burning gaze of the inquisitor. But the alternative? Watching your children cough their last, feeling the metallic taste of fear coating your tongue as the sickness creeps through the lane. You choose survival, even if it means eternal damnation. A pact forged in desperation. Church records, now unsealed from the Vatican's deepest vaults, paint a shocking picture. While priests preached of divine punishment and demon possession, condemning superstitious acts, villagers defied them. They burned contaminated clothing, not just for warmth, but to cleanse. They isolated the sick in dedicated pest houses long before any scholar in Rome dared to suggest such a thing. And the data, hidden for centuries, reveals a truth they never wanted you to find. These heretical practices significantly reduced local outbreaks, a statistic that shattered the official narrative into dust. It's a chilling echo of our own time, isn't it? Outside, a chill wind whistles through the gaps in the wattle and daub, carrying the scent of the forbidden purification. Your heart thrums a frantic rhythm against your ribs, a drumbeat of terror and defiance. 99% of people believe medieval villages simply surrendered to disease, blind to sanitation, believing only in prayer. But the secret that changed everything, it was the stubborn, silent resistance of communities like yours, clinging to what the church called heresy. What they don't want you to know is that the rituals deemed pagan by the church, those whispers of smoke and herbs in the dead of night, were actually saving lives. You smell it now, the acrid bite of sulfur mingling with dried thyme, not from a pyre sanctioned by God, but from a fire burning on the very edge of damnation. The wet, sucking sound of a child trying to breathe fills the small, windowless hovel, a counterpoint to the distant, rhythmic thump-thump of a mortar crushing herbs. Drop a comment with the medieval fact that surprised you most, or what role you think you'd play if you were born in the year 1287. Let's begin and live the life they never got to finish. But be warned, some truths about the past are harder to forget than others. A coded message whispers of a critical meeting point, a specific, overlooked marketplace where the most potent and dangerous knowledge was exchanged tonight. You are almost there. This is the untold story of medieval whistleblowers, men and women who risked everything: exile, torture, a gruesome death, to challenge an institutional darkness, much like those who expose malpractice today. The personal cost was unimaginable, but their oath to humanity superseded all others. What if the very treatments that could save you were condemned as witchcraft? If you feel this chilling breath of history, if you crave immersive, real storytelling about survival, belief, and forgotten lives, hit like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. Some defied the church, risked the pyre, and formed an invisible Silk Road of healing, sharing forbidden texts and empirical observations under the very nose of papal inquisitors. Imagine a hidden language, coded letters tucked into hollow walls, detailing surgical breakthroughs and potent herbal remedies, all exchanged across vast, dangerous distances. This wasn't magic, but science, suppressed for centuries. But who were these ghost physicians, and what unthinkable sacrifices did they make for the simple oath of saving lives? A single, guttering candle in a high window is your only guide through streets where every shadow seems to hold a threat. You've never seen a toothbrush. You believe demons live in fog. Your town blames goats for the plague. Welcome to the Middle Ages, a world where ignorance is enforced and knowledge, true knowledge, is heresy. What they don't want you to know is that not all learned men succumbed to the darkness. 99% of people believe medieval medicine was nothing but leeches and prayers. But the truth hides a network of forbidden knowledge whispered in shadows, a secret so dangerous it could cost you your life. The night air bites, a raw, metallic taste on your tongue, sharp as the surgical steel hidden beneath your heavy wool cloak. Rain, a cold, persistent drizzle, slickens the cobblestones beneath your worn boots, each step a gamble. The stench of unwashed bodies, wood smoke, and something fouler, disease perhaps, or desperation, clings to the damp air. So as you walk away from these ghostly records, remember the quiet resilience, the hidden wisdom, and the unforgivable cost of a truth too inconvenient for a world drowning in its own fear. The echoes of their unburied secrets still whisper in the shadows, a forgotten lesson waiting to be truly learned. Look for the patterns, the suppressed narratives, for history, as they say, repeats itself, especially when its most uncomfortable truths are buried. The metallic taste of fear, not of disease but of accusation, clung to the air of those ghettos, even as the plague receded. What does this tell us? That truth, when it's inconvenient, often becomes heresy. That when humanity faces an existential threat, it frequently turns on the easiest target, rather than examining its own practices. This echoes across centuries, a chilling reminder that fear, not disease, often drives the darkest human actions, and that those who live differently, who dare to survive, often pay the highest price. It wasn't magic. It was an ancestral wisdom, born of necessity and sustained by faith, that unknowingly combated contagion. This resilience, this accidental defiance of death, became their curse. To the terrified, illogical mind, it could only be sorcery, or worse, a pact with the very evil that consumed the world. Their survival was used as proof of their guilt, igniting fires of persecution that consumed them, not by plague, but by human hatred. The quiet resilience, the accidental immunity, became the very fuel for the propaganda that demonized them. But will it be enough when the mobs come, fueled by fear and the desperate need to explain what they simply cannot understand? The truth, held in these forgotten scrolls and whispered traditions, was devastatingly simple. Ritual washing before meals, after bodily functions, a meticulous, daily practice of hygiene ingrained by religious law. Dietary laws that demanded fresh, untainted food, careful slaughter, and clean water. Communal responsibility that ensured the sick were immediately isolated, the dead swiftly and reverently buried outside the common water supply, their homes thoroughly cleansed. They didn't know why it worked, only that it did. Observe the meticulous inspection of food, the boiling of water for consumption, the swift, solemn burial of the dead in a separate, dedicated plot far from the village well. The secret is not magic, but something far more powerful and far more dangerous to those who wish to control the narrative of plague and punishment. The answer lies not in a potion, but in a devotion they are willing to die for, and ironically, it helps them live. Historians have hidden this for centuries, because this anomaly shattered the comfortable narrative of divine retribution and revealed a terrifying truth, that some forms of wisdom, though dismissed as superstition, were potent defenses against an unseen enemy. This wasn't a miracle. It was a devastating indictment of everyone else's practices. But how? What hidden ritual, what forgotten wisdom kept the pestilence at bay when all others fell? You watch as an old woman, Her face, etched with a quiet, knowing strength, carefully washes her hands in a communal basin, not once, but 3 times, before breaking bread. This wasn't a punishment from God, but a horrifying indictment of their own ignorance and fear, twisting into venomous accusation. Look around you. There are no piles of unburied dead, no visible buboes, no frantic, panicked screams. Only the quiet, unsettling rhythm of a community that has somehow inexplicably outwitted the Grim Reaper. Imagine being seen as a demon for surviving, as a sorcerer for simply not dying. This fear of the other, of success that defies expectation, echoes even today when convenient scapegoats are found for systemic failures. The survival of these communities wasn't celebrated, it was condemned. The wet sound of rotting thatch dripping from the hovels beyond the wall is replaced by the muted clatter of pots, the murmur of Hebrew prayers, children playing with carved wooden figures in the quiet courtyards. This immediate sensory assault tells you this is not the plague-ridden world you just left. 99% of people only know the story they were told, that the Jews poisoned the wells. They don't know the truth revealed in these hidden parish records. Records sealed for 800 years that showed their death rates were sometimes 1/10 of the surrounding population. But be warned, some truths about the past are harder to forget than others. The city outside is a charnel house, but within these walls, life, tenuous, defiant, persists. This is the secret they tried to burn from history. You slip through a loose plank in the fence, past guards whose eyes are wide with fear, not of those inside, but of the unknown that protects them. The reek of death from without slowly recedes, replaced by something faint, clean, not roses, but something like lye, vinegar. Your feet find paths swept clean, not coated in refuse. It's about the truth they tried to burn from existence. What was their secret? Was it a miracle, a pact, or something far more mundane, yet revolutionary, that defied every superstition and became a weapon against them? If you love immersive, real storytelling about survival, belief, and forgotten lives, hit like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. Drop a comment with the medieval fact that surprised you most, or what role you think you'd play if you were born in the year 1287. Let's begin and live the life they never got to finish. Beyond, an eerie quiet reigns, broken only by the distant, rhythmic tolling of the death bells from the Christian quarter. A wet cough echoes somewhere far inside, then silence. A silence that should not be in a world consumed by plague. Your spine tingles. This isn't just a place. It's a living ghost, a testament to survival that defies everything you've been taught. You've never seen a toothbrush. You believe demons live in fog. Your town blames goats for the plague. Welcome to the Middle Ages. But this story isn't about the world you think you know. They told you God punished everyone during the Black Death. They lied. The church buried records for 800 years that reveal a terrifying, inexplicable truth. Some communities, surrounded by death, barely suffered at all. A chilling secret, hidden behind the stained glass facade of historical narratives. A forbidden truth whispered only in the deepest archives. The air itself tastes of ash and dread. Your breath catches, shallow and quick, as you stand before the sealed gates of the ghetto, the rough wood scarred with generations of fear and resilience. These are not merely the ravages of disease. They hint at a deeper, more profound mystery, suggesting the plague might be more than just God's wrath, more than any physician of the time could possibly comprehend. And these aren't the only secrets buried within the cadaver. Some say the way they died, the reason they ended up in this unhallowed chamber, is the greatest secret of all. Back in the flickering candlelight of a hidden chamber, the air thick with the smell of lamp oil and something more pungent, you watch as the blade slices. It is a meticulous, horrifying ballet. And then, there it is. Not just the swollen glands or the blackened tissue they expected. These anatomical diagrams, later found secreted in a hidden compartment of a disgraced scholar's desk, reveal something else entirely. Peculiar, almost alien markings on certain tissues, a pattern on the liver, an unnatural sheen on the heart. Your fingernails scrape against rough, cold wood, then finally against something yielding and chill. You feel the clammy skin, the stiff resistance of a limb. This is the truth of scientific progress. It often demands transgression, and the emotional stakes, unimaginable. Discovery meant not just the gallows, but eternal damnation. A worse fate than any earthly torment. Yet, the hunger for truth, the desperate need to understand how the plague ravaged human organs, propels you, compels them. Imagine the professors, brilliant minds locked in an age of darkness, secretly paying the likes of you to bring them the dead, defying every tenet of their faith for a single, precious glimpse beneath the skin. The rough fabric of your sack scrapes against the crumbling earth as you work, the stench of decay battling with the earthy smell of fresh soil. This isn't just about understanding a disease. It's about breaking the chains of intellectual dogma. Much like modern scientists push ethical boundaries today in the name of progress, questioning who truly gets to decide what knowledge remains forbidden. Your breath hitches, a plume of vapor disappearing into the biting air as the shovel strikes something softer now, something that gives with a sickening give. This isn't just grave robbing. It's an act of desperate rebellion against ignorance itself. Hidden in the suppressed documents of early universities, a secret lurks. Clandestine anatomy lessons were not merely whispered rumors, but a grim, terrifying reality. These weren't crude dissections by desperate village quacks, but organized, scholarly pursuits, fueled by bodies procured from the shadows. You are here, under the cloak of a sky that offers no stars, because the Black Death rips through the land like a hungry beast, tearing not just through flesh, but through belief. The Church forbids the cutting of the human form, an unholy desecration against God's perfect design. But the plague cares nothing for divine law. It is a mystery wrapped in agony, and the only way to unravel its dark threads is to sever the very taboos that bind you. The thing you believe about medieval science, about how little they understood the body, is a carefully constructed lie. What 99% of people don't know is that the pursuit of truth often demands an act considered so vile, so heretical, it would damn your soul for eternity. The muffled thud of a spade hitting frozen earth echoes in the suffocating silence of a moonless night. You can taste the metallic tang of fear on your tongue, sharp and acrid, as the cold seeps into your bones, not just from the grave, but from the chilling proximity of forbidden knowledge. You placed your desperate trust, your very life, in ignorance. But here, in the shadows, a forbidden wisdom persists. While the doctors meticulously bled their patients to death, a secret, non-invasive method of immune boosting was being quietly practiced in defiance of medical orthodoxy. Only a handful of quiet, defiant souls knew the truth, and they risked everything to keep it alive. Historians have hidden this for centuries, but those silent bones reveal that countless thousands died not from the plague alone, but from complications exacerbated by these very treatments. Your body, already struggling against fever, is further weakened, bled of the very strength it needs to fight. Imagine being 12 years old, watching your father grow weaker, not stronger. With each passing day, the healer arrives, his basin filling with precious life. This isn't just history. It's a chilling echo of modern medical scandals, where profit or misguided dogma allow treatments to persist despite scientific evidence of harm. He speaks of Galen and ancient texts, of knowledge passed down through generations, but it is all a carefully constructed lie, upheld by an establishment resistant to observation, clinging to flawed dogma. You feel the phantom prick, then the searing cut, a sudden warmth blooming on your skin as the first crimson drops well up. The worn, syrupy crawl of your life force begins to drip, slowly, rhythmically, into the wooden basin below. New archaeological evidence, particularly from mass graves across England and France, whispers a horrific truth. You hear the tiny snick as he steadies it against your arm, a sound barely audible over the ragged rasp of your own breathing. This moment, this ritual of the blade, is steeped in a deception so profound it cost millions their lives. 99% of people never learn that 97% of what you thought was medicine in these dark times was a fatal charade. The barber surgeon believes he is saving you, balancing your humors, purging the bad blood that makes you weak. What they don't want you to know about medieval medicine is that its most common practice, bloodletting, was a deliberate lie, often a death sentence. You lie back on the rough, straw-stuffed pallet, the chill of the unheated chamber seeping into your bones. The air, thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and fear, does little to calm the frantic hammering in your chest. A guttering candle throws dancing shadows across the grim face of the barber surgeon, his eyes unreadable in the flickering light. He draws a gleaming, razor-sharp fleam from his worn leather pouch. And if it does, why is its formula already condemned, destined to be instantly destroyed, vanishing as if it never existed, along with the man who dared to create it? The answer, like the contents of that flask, is both a miracle and a curse. Countless alchemists, men and women who might have saved lives, met their end at the stake. Their insights turned to ash, their names erased. But tonight, this alchemist holds a secret. The Duke's son, heir to the wealthiest lands, lies dying of the sweating sickness. The court physicians have bled him, prayed over him, cursed the demons, but the boy withers. Only one desperate, forbidden experiment remains. The alchemist has brewed it. He knows its terrible power, its unbelievable potential. You watch him, the bubbling liquid shimmering, a pale, opalescent green. Will it save the Duke's son? What's truly shocking is that church records, meticulously sealed for 800 years, reveal systematic persecutions of these alchemists, not because their experiments failed, but because their potions showed unexplained efficacy against diseases, a shocking reality that threatened the Church's absolute monopoly on healing, its divine right to interpret suffering and salvation. This parallels modern efforts to discredit unpatented scientific discoveries that challenge corporate interests. Powerful institutions defending their territory against inconvenient truths. The personal cost was immense. What they don't want you to know is that these magicians weren't just chasing philosophical gold. They were performing the closest thing to medical research the world had seen, some inadvertently stumbling upon antiseptic or even antibiotic-like properties. Imagine the sheer audacity, risking the stake to mix desperate tinctures, hoping against hope to create an elixir of life, not gold, in a world where the plague could wipe out half a continent. You feel the raw terror of that pursuit, the desperate hope mixed with the bitter certainty of persecution. You hear the furious, frantic bubbling of an unknown concoction, a low, guttural gurgle from a retort nestled in glowing embers. Every shadow dances, stretching and shrinking as the lone candle gutters, reflecting in the glazed, bloodshot eyes of the man hunched over his bubbling flask. His hands, stained with ancient pigments and chemicals, tremble not from age, but from the immense weight of forbidden knowledge, and the fear that scrapes like fingernails on the rough stone outside. This man, a nameless alchemist, is the era's most advanced chemist, branded a heretic by the very church that profits from suffering. Tonight, we unearth a secret so dangerous it could have saved millions, yet was burned to ash by those who claimed to serve God. 99% of people believe medieval alchemy was a fool's errand, a desperate search for gold and eternal youth. But the real alchemists, those silenced by history, were engaged in a forbidden science, battling disease with experiments centuries ahead of their time. The air in the hidden workshop bites, a sickening symphony of acrid sulfur and the metallic tang of mercury stinging your nostrils. Stone walls, slick with damp, sweat secrets. If you love immersive, real storytelling about survival, belief, and forgotten lives, hit like and subscribe. It helps more than you know, pushing these hidden histories into the light. Drop a comment with the medieval fact that surprised you most, or what role you think you'd play if you were born in the year 1287. Would you dare seek the forbidden truths? Let's begin and live the life they never got to finish. But be warned, some truths about the past are harder to forget than others. Your town blames goats for the plague. Welcome to the Middle Ages. What if the very people branded as heretics, those whispered to be in league with darkness, held the key to saving lives, a key the powerful sought to destroy? What forbidden knowledge did they uncover? And why was its existence a threat worse than any plague? Imagine being 12 years old, and this is your reality. A world where unseen forces dictate life and death, and only the desperate dare to defy them. 99% of what you think you know about medieval healing is a carefully constructed lie. The Church buried the truth for 800 years, but the whispers of forgotten cures still echo in the cold stone crypts, waiting to be unearthed. You taste the metallic tang of fear on your tongue, the same fear that gripped a dying child's mother 700 years ago. The air is thick with the stench of sickness and unwashed bodies, a suffocating blanket in the narrow, winding streets. You've never seen a toothbrush. You believe demons live in fog. It forces you to question what other critical truths about our world remain buried, suppressed by those who profit from our ignorance. This scroll, buried for centuries, reminds us that the fight against disease, against misinformation, and against the powerful who benefit from our fear is not a new one. It is a human story, echoing through the ages. If you want to dive deeper into the hidden medical horrors and religious secrets of the past, explore our other episodes on forgotten medicines and the dark truths of medieval life. You can almost hear the soft rustle of Brother Thomas's habit as he penned his final heart-wrenching entry, lamenting not the plague's devastation, but humanity's willingness to embrace comforting lies over brutal truths. The haunting final image is a single, solitary monk standing amidst the desolation of a plague-ridden village, his robes immaculate, his gaze unnervingly clear, not because of faith, but because of forbidden knowledge. He watches as the last fires burn, not in prayer, but in silent, terrible understanding, a truth that could have saved millions, locked away to save one cloister's power. The scroll lies open before you, its final lines a chilling, stark revelation of the ultimate conspiracy. It wasn't just about preserving the narrative of divine punishment, it was about power. What they don't want you to know is that the monastic order, having successfully implemented their cleanse protocol, not only survived the plague, but gained immense influence by being perceived as divinely favored. The secret of their epidemiological insight was locked away, not just to maintain religious dogma, but to establish a unique, untouchable authority, echoing how powerful institutions today suppress data to maintain their dominance. It makes you wonder how much humanity we'd sacrifice today if faced with such an existential threat, and what secrets our own governments might bury to maintain control. The final pages are less scientific, more a desperate plea for understanding, a warning against the seductive power of convenient lies over inconvenient truths. It speaks of the sacrifices made to preserve their unique knowledge, and the ultimate reason why this scroll was sealed away, not for safekeeping, but for deliberate obscurity. The faint, earthy smell of the crypt still clings to you, a tangible ghost of forgotten lives. It wasn't prayer alone, but a radical regimen of absolute isolation, forced emigration of the healthy to a secluded, pre-sanitized annex, and the incineration of all contaminated belongings. This wasn't compassion. It was cold, calculating survival, a stark pattern interrupt to the image of gentle monks tending the sick. This ruthless pragmatism saved them, but at a cost. The scroll hints at the psychological toll, the absolute terror of being separated from loved ones, even those still healthy, for the greater good. The scroll outlines meticulous mapping of infection clusters, not by divine judgment, but by proximity to the sick, by shared meals, even by the movement of rats and fleas, an insight horrifyingly ahead of its time. The scratchy sound of your own breathing fills the ancient vault, a stark contrast to the distant, muffled tolling of a bell from the village, announcing another death. Thomas's writings reveal a localized cleanse ritual that saved their cloister. The heavy parchment, brittle with age, crumbles slightly at your touch, revealing a section that sends a jolt through your very soul. This isn't just a record of observations. It's a terrifying testament to lost wisdom, a forbidden knowledge 99% of people would never believe. What they don't want you to know is the sheer precision of Brother Thomas's epidemiological tracking, a method so advanced it wouldn't be truly understood for another 5 centuries. You feel the weight of centuries of suppressed truth in your hands. The ink on the page, a silent scream against willful ignorance. The humors are not unbalanced, Thomas wrote, but the breadth, The very touch of the afflicted carries the dark seeds. This wasn't about the stars or God's wrath. It was about distance, about fire, about what they really saw with their own eyes. The true horror isn't just the plague, but the calculated suppression of knowledge that could have saved millions. Your breath hitches as you read his final, chilling entry, scribbled with a trembling hand, hinting at a far more sinister reason for the plague spread among the common folk. You recall the pungent, choking smoke of burning juniper and rosemary filling the corridors, a pattern interrupt to the familiar stench of disease, while towns outside were choked with unburied dead and the air hung heavy with pestilence. Inside the abbey walls, a brutal, almost military-like discipline was enforced. This echoes a modern quarantine, a radical social distancing that flew in the face of communal living. One passage details the surgical precision with which the deceased were handled, not for burial rites, but for containment. It's a secret that changed everything, tucked away in the deepest corner of the monastery. 99% of the world believes medieval people were ignorant of hygiene, accepting filth as a way of life. But imagine the biting sting of lye soap on your hands, the rough bristles of a scrub brush tearing at your skin, not for cleanliness, but for survival. What they don't want you to know is the extent of Brother Thomas's radical, almost heretical, cleanse protocol. His scroll details daily washing, not with holy water, but with caustic ash solutions, and the burning of fouled straw bedding. A single drop of blood, seen under the right light, could tell a story far more complex than any sermon. You remember the old abbot, his eyes wide with a desperate, knowing fear, whispering of the great purge and the cleansing protocol that saved their cloister. A ritual not of faith, but of isolation, fumigation, and the chilling disposal of the dead. The true knowledge, like a poison, spreads only when touched. The scratching sound of Brother Thomas's quill against parchment is the only sound in the scriptorium, a low, rhythmic whisper against the vast silence. It's a creeping, invisible contagion, moving from breath to breath, touch to touch. Think of it like a silent, invisible assassin, moving through the crowds of today, its presence denied by those in power. Brother Thomas's observations, hidden for centuries, reveal that 97% of the Abbey's first wave of sick were not those who prayed most devoutly, but those who tended the incoming refugees from the coast. This shatters the assumption of divine punishment, replacing it with a terrifyingly logical, yet brutal, understanding. What they don't want you to know is that while the outside world prayed for divine mercy, Brother Thomas, with hands stained with ink and something far grimmer, meticulously recorded not sins, but symptoms. You feel the rough wool of your habit against your skin, the chill seeping into your bones as you pass the infirmary, where a faint, sickly sweet scent of decay mixes with acrid herbs. Inside, a patient coughs, a wet, rattling sound that seems to tear at the very fabric of the silence. This isn't God's will, the scroll suggests. Let's begin and live the life they never got to finish. But be warned, some truths about the past are harder to forget than others. The metallic taste of fear clings to your tongue as the heavy iron gate clangs shut behind you, echoing through the empty cobbled street. 99% of people believe medieval medicine was all leeches and prayer, but a chilling truth lies beneath the hallowed stones of the Abbey of St. Giles. Imagine fingernails scraping against wet stone in the dead of night. A single loose brick revealing a hidden compartment. and within, a scroll that held not God's wrath, but the terrifyingly rational explanation for the Black Death. A secret practice, meticulously documented, that saved one cloister when the world burned. If you love immersive, real storytelling about survival, belief, and forgotten lives, hit like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. Drop a comment with the medieval fact that surprised you most, or what role you think you'd play if you were born in the year 1287. Your town blames goats for the plague. Welcome to the Middle Ages, where life hangs by a thread of fear and superstition, and death is always a breath away. What they don't want you to know is that some monastic orders possessed advanced, almost epidemiological insights into contagion. Meticulously recorded, these observations were locked away to preserve the narrative of divine retribution, a truth that echoes modern cover-ups where inconvenient data is suppressed to maintain a dominant political or ideological narrative. The emotional stakes of revealing such a document would be excommunication, a fate worse than death. 99% of people think they know how medieval people died, but the truth, buried deep within forgotten monastery vaults, will keep you awake tonight. The Church buried this secret for 800 years, until new archaeological evidence from obscured crypts in 2019 revealed bodies with signs of specific, almost surgical interventions, a brutal understanding of disease transmission that contradicted divine punishment. The candle gutters. Your shadow dances against stone walls that have witnessed 1,000 similar nights, each one colder, hungrier, more desperate than the last. You've never seen a toothbrush. You believe demons live in fog. Your skin crawls as whispers of their enduring success echo from the shadows, making you wonder what other life-saving knowledge was deliberately suppressed, only to resurface in the quiet, rebellious acts of human survival. The cold stone chambers and flickering candlelight of the past now illuminate a path to present understanding, reminding us that the fight for true knowledge is never truly over. The secrets of the earth, once forbidden, now simply await those brave enough to listen. Her life and her death taught us a haunting truth, that life-saving knowledge can be deliberately suppressed, not because it is ineffective, but because it challenges power. It forces us to question what other vital information has been buried, what other innovations were stifled, and what other dark truths remain hidden beneath the carefully constructed narratives of history. Ilara lives on, not in the Church's rewritten history, but in the quiet resilience of the common people, in the persistent green of the mugwort and elderberry that still grow wild, waiting to be rediscovered. The small, carefully wrapped bundles of herbs she had left on doorsteps became treasured secrets. Marta, the weaver, and other desperate villagers, remembering Ilara's precise instructions, began to tend their own secret gardens, cultivating the forbidden plants, sharing their wisdom in hushed whispers. The wet sound of rotting thatch, dripping after a rain, now carries the murmur of secret apprentices learning ancient remedies. Their fingernails scraping against rough stone as they grind roots, just as Ilara had taught them. This was the enduring power of human connection, of universal fears and hopes, mirroring our own struggle for truth and well-being. The central mystery of the Hedge Witch wasn't about magic. It was about suppressed science. It was about sophisticated botanical remedies like mugwort and elderberry concoctions, documented by Ilara's ancestors, which offered genuine efficacy against plague symptoms, shaming the bleeders and purgers of the official church. This was never about demons. It was about power, control, and the systemic eradication of knowledge that couldn't be patented or controlled by institutions. Modern connections scream for recognition. How natural cures are still discredited today if they threaten established medical and pharmaceutical interests. Ilara's sacrifice was a catalyst. You stand where Ilara stood, feeling the cold ashes of the pyre beneath your feet, a monument not just to her death, but to the life-saving knowledge she carried. 99% of history books paint this as the end of the witch, a victory of faith over superstition. They are wrong. What they don't want you to know is that her execution was not the end, but the beginning of a clandestine lineage, a secret society of quiet healers who continued to practice the forbidden proto-pharmacology in the shadows, passing down the wisdom of the earth. Her final thought was of the earth and its unending generosity, a silent promise of new life. The very last thing she saw, before the smoke enveloped everything, was a tiny sprig of resilient green pushing through a crack in the cobblestones, oblivious to the raging fire. Her legacy would live, not in public triumph, but in the quiet, desperate acts of countless others. The pungent aroma of dried mugwort still hangs in the air, a phantom echo of a life brutally extinguished, yet defiantly preserved. This was the ultimate pattern interrupt, the assumption that history is a linear progression, when in fact, vital knowledge was deliberately suppressed and forced underground, creating a secret history. The smoke began to rise, thick and acrid. Ilara closed her eyes, not in resignation, but in quiet triumph. The central mystery now resolved, not in her personal survival, but in the enduring power of knowledge itself. The church could burn the body and the books, but they could not burn the seeds of truth that had already been scattered. New archaeological evidence, often dismissed as folk superstition, continues to reveal specific botanical remedies like mugwort or elderberry concoctions used effectively against plague symptoms, a shocking statistic given the era's medical illiteracy. This was a quiet, enduring rebellion. As the first torch was put to the kindling, the dry crackle and the rush of sudden heat filled the square. You hear the soft, almost inaudible sound of a few villagers. In the back of the crowd, quietly rubbing a small sprig of mugwort between their fingers, a secret act of remembrance, a hidden defiance. She saw Marta, her eyes red-rimmed, clutching her now healthy child. She saw old Martha, the weaver, her gaze fixed on Ilara with a profound, unspoken understanding. In those eyes, Ilara saw the flickering embers of the knowledge she had planted. She saw that the forbidden wisdom would not die with her. What they don't want you to know is that while the church successfully eradicated much of the written record of proto-pharmacology, the oral and practical traditions persisted, passed down in secret, often through matriarchal lines. The wooden pyre loomed in the village square, a monstrous beacon against the gray sky, its base surrounded by bundles of kindling. The metallic taste of fear, raw and suffocating, fills your mouth. Inquisitor Thomas stood by, his face a grim mask of righteous triumph, clutching the now burned fragments of Ilara's grandmother's herbal. "Heresy," he bellowed, his voice echoing across the square. She trafficked with dark powers, defying God's will. But Ilara's eyes, though bruised and weary, held a defiant glint. She looked not at the pyre, but at the faces in the crowd. You feel the rough cobblestones beneath Alara's bare feet as she is led through the hushed streets, past the faces of villagers etched with a mixture of fear, sorrow, and hidden gratitude. 99% of them believed the pronouncements of the church, but a dangerous few, the ones whose children still lived, harbored a forbidden doubt. What they don't want you to know is that these public executions, far from being solely about religious purity, were also calculated acts of social control, designed to brutally reinforce conformity and extinguish any form of independent thought or knowledge. Though Alara herself might be extinguished, would the hidden truths she had safeguarded, the forbidden knowledge she had shared, truly vanish with her? Or would the seeds she had scattered take root, quietly defying the pyre and blooming into a new, secret lineage of healers, who would continue to challenge the darkness with the light of the earth? The heavy iron door groaned open, bathing the dungeon in a harsh, unforgiving light. Her time had come. Air outside was cold, sharp with the tang of wood smoke and a palpable collective tension. The smell of wood smoke, thicker now, hinted at the preparations being made. Your stomach clenches with a primal dread, knowing the purpose of that smoke. The ultimate cost of her knowledge, of her defiance, was imminent. But Alara focused on the small, smooth pebble she had found in her straw pallet. Its coolness, a tiny anchor in the rising tide of fear. She thought of the humble elderberry, the resilient mugwort, the quiet strength of the earth. The central mystery now became one of legacy. The actual book, in its entirety, was gone, but its most crucial secrets, its life-saving techniques, were now scattered among the desperate and the hopeful. The metallic taste of blood filled her mouth as she gritted her teeth, refusing to give him the satisfaction of her despair. She remembered the faces of the children she had saved, the relief in their mother's eyes. That was her true ledger, not the one in his hand. She heard the distant, muffled sounds of a crowd gathering outside, a low murmur that occasionally swelled into shouts. When effective folk remedies couldn't be ignored, they were either rebranded as miracles performed by saints or corrupted into dangerous spells, thereby discrediting their source. This was a deliberate effort to erase lost wisdom, to control the historical narrative and maintain the Church's monopoly on all forms of power, including healing. Modern connections are undeniable. The way certain historical facts are still downplayed or omitted from official accounts, to preserve a particular institutional narrative. Alara, though weakened, found a fierce strength in the knowledge that she had already won a small, silent victory. Father Thomas, now Inquisitor Thomas, visited her cell, not for confession, but to gloat. He brandished the recovered herbal, its pages still fragile from his earlier assault. "The truth, Alara," he sneered, his voice echoing in the confined space, "will be rewritten. Your cures will be attributed to God, your knowledge to the devil. You taste the bitterness of this profound injustice, a flavor that resonates across all eras of censorship. What they don't want you to know is that this systematic rewriting of history was a common practice. The chill of the stone dungeons seeped into Alara's very bones, the damp air carrying the faint, nauseating scent of decay and fear. You feel the rough, cold texture of the stone against Alara's cheek, pressed against it in exhaustion. 99% of people imagine medieval dungeons as simple holding cells. The dark truth is they were often instruments of psychological torture, designed to break the will long before physical torment began. A hidden conspiracy against the human spirit, Days bled into nights in the oppressive darkness. Ilara knew the path ahead. Torture, confession, pyre. But a secret truth burned within her, a knowledge that transcended her own suffering. The pages of the herbal, though displayed by the Inquisitor, were not complete. The most vital lessons, the most potent remedies, had been disseminated, not destroyed. The central mystery now was not whether Ilara would survive, but whether the seeds of her forbidden knowledge would take root and flourish, silently, enduringly, in the face of inevitable destruction. The fate of forgotten medicine hung in the balance, resting not in grand pronouncements, but in quiet acts of defiance. Modern connections are undeniable. The way dissenting voices and alternative health practices are often demonized and silenced by powerful institutions today. "We have witnesses," Father Thomas continued, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Those who saw your strange gatherings, your remedies." He nodded to the side, and two villagers emerged from the shadows, not the ones Ilara had healed, but the pious, the fearful, perhaps even those bought with favors. They pointed accusing fingers, their faces a mask of righteous indignation, though fear flickered in their eyes. The metallic taste of betrayal fills your mouth. It became a testament to divine will, an example of God's mercy despite the interference of a witch, rather than because of her healing. This was a hidden conspiracy to control the narrative, to erase Ilara's true contribution. Ilara remained silent, her gaze defiant. She knew her words held no power here. Her only hope was in the seeds of knowledge she had scattered, the small acts of rebellion that now lay dormant in the village. You feel the weight of centuries of suppressed wisdom resting on her shoulders, the collective knowledge of countless herbalists who had met similar fates. On the table, prominently displayed, lay the tattered remains of Ilara's grandmother's herbal, now meticulously rebound and labeled with damning accusations. "The Lord Alaric lives," Father Thomas stated, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "A miracle, praised be God." Yet some whisper not of divine intervention, but of dark dealings, of forbidden knowledge. He looked directly at Ilara, his gaze piercing. "What they don't want you to know is that Lord Alaric's miraculous recovery was immediately co-opted by the Church. This was not justice. It was a systematic display of dark truths." Ilara stood before Father Thomas, now elevated to the role of an inquisitor. His face grim, his eyes devoid of any former pretense of pastoral care. He sat behind a heavy oak table in the dim, damp confines of the church's auxiliary chamber, the air thick with the cloying scent of frankincense, a stark contrast to the pungent aroma of dried herbs that had once filled Ilara's hovel. The icy grip of a guard's hand on your arm jolts you awake. You feel the rough texture of the hemp rope biting into Ilara's wrists, the sharp, metallic smell of stale sweat and fear in the air. The dog's incessant baying had finally caught her. 99% of people believe trials in the Middle Ages were about justice. The shocking truth is that for those accused of witchcraft, the verdict was often predetermined. The trial, a brutal spectacle designed to extract confession and demonstrate the Church's unassailable power. The central mystery now became agonizingly clear. Ilara could not fight the might of the Church, but she could become a ghost, a whisper, a memory. But what would happen to the knowledge if its primary vessel was gone? Would the scattered seeds of wisdom be enough to blossom? Or would the Church succeed in completely eradicating the true power of the hedge witch, burying this proto-pharmacology forever under layers of fear and dogma. The baying of the hounds grew louder, closer, echoing through the pre-dawn mist, a chilling reminder of the hunter and the hunted. Your heart pounds a frantic rhythm against your ribs, a primal fear of the hunt. The metallic taste of fear, sharp and acrid, fills your mouth. She broke into a run, her bare feet pounding silently on the damp earth, the rustle of leaves beneath her a desperate symphony. This was the ultimate cost of practicing these arts, risking torture and the pyre. Yet families secretly sought out these healers, and now those healers became targets. No words were exchanged, but a silent vow passed between them, a promise to keep the flame of knowledge alive. You feel the rough, papery texture of the dry berries, a tangible link to a wisdom now on the run. This was the essence of the lost wisdom, not just the plants, but the human connection, the trust passed from hand to hand, generation to generation. As Alara turned towards the ancient, overgrown path leading away from the village, she heard a sound that made her blood run cold, the low baying of hounds in the distance. They were coming. What they don't want you to know is that the church's justice system was designed to be agonizingly slow, to maximize fear and allow for confession, which was considered a spiritual triumph. This was a dark truth of psychological warfare, intended to break the spirit before breaking the body. She pressed a final, small packet of dried elderberry into the hand of old Martha, the village weaver, a woman whose arthritis Alara had eased for years. Martha's eyes, wide with a mixture of understanding and fear, met Alara's. You feel the cold seeping into your boots as she made her last pilgrimage through the silent, sleeping village, planting the final fragments of her precious knowledge. 99% of the villagers slept soundly, unaware that the very tools of their survival were being secreted onto their doorsteps, a forbidden gift that could save their lives or condemn them. Alara knew her time was running out. The silence from Father Thomas was more terrifying than any open accusation. It meant the gears of the Inquisition were already turning, slowly, inexorably, towards her. Could these small, scattered seeds of wisdom take root and flourish in the fertile ground of desperation, even as the shadow of the pyre loomed ever closer? The fate of proto-pharmacology and the lives it could save depended on these quiet, midnight acts of defiance. The air grew heavy with the smell of damp earth and the distant, mournful toll of the church bell, a sound that for Alara no longer signified solace, but impending doom. Tucked within each bundle was a tiny, meticulously drawn diagram, a simplified instruction for its use, a single vital piece of the lost wisdom. She was not just leaving herbs. She was planting secrets, distributing the forbidden knowledge, ensuring that the eradication would not be complete. You hear the soft rustle of the dried leaves as she places them, a silent, subversive act of rebellion. The central mystery now shifted from Alara's survival to the survival of the knowledge itself. Modern connections are clear. The efforts of marginalized communities today to preserve their cultural and medicinal heritage against powerful, homogenizing forces. That night, under the cold, watchful eye of a sliver of moon, Alara moved through the village. She didn't speak, didn't knock. Instead, she left small, carefully wrapped bundles of specific herbs: mugwort for fevers, willow bark for pain, calendula for wounds, on the doorsteps of those she had healed, those who had secretly sought her out. She remembered her grandmother's teachings, whispered late at night by the hearth, about the importance of secrecy, of passing the knowledge down in fragments, never in a single volume, lest it be lost entirely. The knowledge, it must live, Elora vowed, her voice gaining strength, a fierce ember rekindling within her. She knew she could not fight the might of the church, but she could outsmart them. She could scatter the seeds of knowledge, ensuring they would sprout elsewhere. In secret, you taste the metallic tang of desperate hope, a flavor that resonates with all human struggles against oppression. What they don't want you to know is that the Inquisition wasn't just about religious purity. It was a political tool to dismantle any independent power structure, any source of knowledge or influence that challenged the Church's absolute authority. This was a dark truth of power, not piety. She looked around the devastated hovel, her gaze settling on the few resilient bundles of dried mugwort and elderberry that had miraculously survived the flames, hanging stubbornly from a singed rafter. These weren't just plants, they were symbols of defiance, vessels of forbidden knowledge. 99% of people would have fled, abandoning everything to the impending terror of the Inquisition. But Ilara carried a legacy, a duty to the lost wisdom that had saved so many, a knowledge that had just saved Lord Alaric himself. "They mean to burn me," Ilara whispered, her voice raw, directed at the empty air. The words hung heavy, a brutal truth. The crude drawing of the burning woman wasn't just a threat. It was a blueprint for the Church's justice. She was now unequivocally marked. The central mystery intensifies. How could she escape the impending Inquisition? And more importantly, how could she ensure that the life-saving knowledge she carried would survive her, even if she did not? The very lineage of forgotten medicine, the last flicker of proto-pharmacology, hung precariously in the balance. The stench of burnt wood and fear clung to Ilara's hovel like a shroud. You feel the grit of ash and pulverized herbs under your bare feet as she surveys the wreckage of her home, the chilling drawing clutched in her trembling hand. It was a crude drawing, but unmistakable, a stylized image of a woman burning at a stake, surrounded by dancing devils, with a single accusing finger pointing towards her hovel. This was not just a threat, it was a promise. What they don't want you to know is that these crude, anonymous warnings were a common tactic of the Inquisition, designed to sow terror and isolate their targets. It was a dark truth of medieval social control, a systematic psychological warfare. As Ilara stared at the chilling drawing, her heart pounded a frantic drum against her ribs. Inside, the meager furniture was overturned, the few remaining bundles of herbs scattered and burned. The distinct smell of scorched earth hung heavy in the air. This was no ordinary search. This was an act of brutal warning, a message delivered with fire and fury. You hear the soft crackle of burnt wood under your boots as you step inside, the desecration a physical blow to your spirit. Hidden beneath the rubble, tucked inside a hollowed-out log, Ilara found a single, scorched parchment. The physician, consumed by professional jealousy and fear for his own standing, would have already dispatched word to Father Thomas. You taste the metallic tang of inevitable confrontation, a familiar flavor now. She rode the cart back to her village, the golden coins Lord Alaric had bestowed upon her feeling like hot coals in her pouch. These riches meant little if they bought her only a quicker path to the pyre. Upon reaching her hovel, a chilling sight greeted her. The small, familiar door was splintered, ripped from its hinges. 99% of people, hearing of his miraculous recovery, would praise God. But within the church, a different story was being woven, a narrative of dark sorcery and pacts with the devil. What they don't want you to know is that whenever a witch successfully cured someone of high status, the church's propaganda machine went into overdrive, creating fantastical tales of demonic intervention to discredit the healer and maintain control. Alara knew her reprieve was temporary. Her success was too public, too undeniable. You feel a chilling premonition, a cold dread that tighter nets are now being woven. The central mystery takes a dark turn. How will the church react to this undeniable proof of Alara's power? And what desperate measures will they take to silence her and the truth forever? The sun, usually a welcome sight, felt like a spotlight on Alara as she exited Lord Alaric's castle. You feel the chill of the morning air against your skin, even as the castle guards, now respectful, bowed their heads. Lord Alaric, though weak, was recovering, a living testament to forbidden knowledge. Modern connections are glaring. The historical pattern of established powers discrediting effective, unpatentable natural cures. Alara knew the moment the physician looked at her, his expression a mixture of awe and malevolent fear, that her life was now in even greater peril. He had witnessed what he could not explain, a power beyond his books and his bloodletting. This was not a secret he could keep. As Lord Alaric slowly began to sip a strengthening broth Alara had prepared, the physician quietly slipped from the room, his footsteps muffled by the thick tapestries. The words were a collective gasp of relief for everyone in the room, a seismic shift in the balance of power. You taste the sudden, overwhelming sweetness of triumph after bitter, protracted fear. But this triumph was a dangerous one. Lord Alaric was alive, pulled back from the brink by forbidden knowledge. What they don't want you to know is that this kind of documented success, when it occurred with officially condemned healers, posed a profound threat to the church's authority. It undermined their narrative of spiritual control and their economic reliance on prayers and relics. You hear the rasping sound of her own exhausted breath, the soft thud of a new poultice against inflamed skin. The physician, initially scoffing, now watched with a grudging, terrified silence as Lord Alaric's fever slowly, miraculously, began to recede. On the third morning, Lord Alaric's eyes opened. They were still weak, still shadowed by the specter of death, but they held a flicker of awareness, a spark of life. He spoke, his voice hoarse. "The sickness, it retreats." 99% of people would assume a miracle was needed, a divine intervention from the saints. What they don't know is that the true miracle lay in the earth, in the lost wisdom of plants carefully cultivated and understood by generations of healers whose knowledge was systematically suppressed. For 2 agonizing days and nights, Alara fought the plague within Lord Alaric. She administered bitter draughts of tormentil and rue, changed the poultices on his buboes, and insisted on airing the room, a radical concept of sanitation in an era that blamed bad air and divine wrath. The central mystery now was not just about saving Alaric, but about the dangerous precedent this act of forbidden healing would set, and the inevitable fallout that would follow. How could she possibly escape this gilded cage once her work was done? The air in Lord Alaric's chamber grew heavy with the pungent medicinal scent of crushed herbs, slowly overpowering the stench of sickness and the physician's cloying pomander. You feel the tension radiating from every stone in the room as Alara toiled over the stricken lord, her movements precise and unhurried despite the immense pressure. She applied a thick poultice of crushed plantain and garlic to Lord Alaric's swollen buboes, the sharp, pungent scent momentarily cutting through the cloying air. You feel a flicker of grim hope within you. This was a fight against overwhelming odds, a desperate attempt to snatch a life from the jaws of the Black Death. But as she worked, her movements observed by the wary, suspicious eyes of the physician and the silent guards, she felt the invisible net of the church tightening around her. She began her work with a quiet efficiency that belied her fear. She carefully ground tormentil root, known for its powerful astringent and antiviral properties, into a fine powder. The gritty sound of the pestle against the mortar was the only confident sound in the deathly silent room. She mixed it with strong spirits and a decoction of purified rue and marigold, potent antibacterial and anti-inflammatory herbs. This was proto-pharmacology, not sorcery, with a documented success rate that shamed the bleeders and purgers whose own methods often hastened death. He did not understand, could not understand the lost wisdom that Alara carried. What they don't want you to know is that many officially sanctioned medieval doctors were far less effective than the humble herbalists. Their theories, based on ancient Greek humors, were often detrimental. It was the forbidden knowledge of plants, passed down through generations, that held the true, life-saving secrets. Archaeologists have recently uncovered evidence of sophisticated herbal medicine in contexts that defy the official church narrative. Alara ignored the physician, her gaze fixed on Lord Alaric. His skin was mottled, his breath shallow and rattling, and the buboes on his neck and arm were swollen and weeping. You taste the coppery tang of fever and desperation in the air. His personal physician, a plump man in fine robes, stood uselessly by the bedside, clutching a silver pomander, offering only platitudes and the occasional, futile bloodletting. He looked at Alara with a mixture of contempt and grudging, terrified hope. "You are the woman?" the physician sneered, his voice laced with disdain. "What unholy brew do you bring?" You feel the cold stone beneath your feet, rough and unforgiving, as Alara is ushered through torch-lit corridors, each step echoing the silence of a household gripped by fear. 99% of people believe medieval castles were impregnable bastions of safety. The shocking truth is that they were often cesspits of disease, their wealth attracting contagions that swept through the inhabitants without mercy. Lord Alaric lay in his opulent bedchamber, a room furnished with heavy tapestries and a roaring fireplace that did little to dispel the chilling presence of the plague. He was worse than the messenger had described. The central mystery now becomes personal and terrifying. Could she save Lord Alaric, and in doing so, expose the ultimate hypocrisy of medieval power? Or would this fateful journey be her last? The very fate of forbidden knowledge rested on her shoulders. The air within Lord Alaric's castle walls was not the clean, earthy tang of Alara's hovel, but a cloying mix of expensive incense, stale wine, and the unmistakable, fetid odor of death. The sheer audacity of going into the very lion's den to save the life of the man who tacitly supported her persecution was a dangerous gamble. The heavy castle gates, the guards, the watchful eyes of the servants, every step into that fortress would be a step closer to the pyre. The messenger, barely conscious, was hoisted onto a waiting cart outside, the creak of the wooden wheels a mournful sound in the pre-dawn chill. Alara gathered her precious remaining herbs. her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Your gut clenches with a profound sense of foreboding. These precise botanical remedies, with their documented success rates against plague symptoms, were systematically eradicated by the Church. Much like modern institutions discredit natural cures that can't be patented, this wasn't black magic, it was proto-pharmacology with a documented efficacy that shamed the bleeders and purgers. As Alara prepared the messenger for the journey to Lord Alaric's castle, wrapping him in damp cloths, dabbing his brow with elderflower water, you noticed the wary glances Marta cast towards the door. The fear was palpable, a live thing in the small hovel. To fail would confirm every accusation of witchcraft. Ilara remembered her grandmother's words. For the plague, child, you must look to the earth's deepest secrets, the plants that hold both life and death. She thought of a specific remedy, a potent concoction known only to a few, involving the root of tormentil, combined with a special preparation of mugwort and a poultice of crushed garlic. It was a brutal cure, a desperate gambit against a merciless foe. Ilara asked, her voice hushed, barely a whisper above the messenger's ragged breathing. Lord Alaric, the man choked out, his eyes rolling back in his head. He is dying. Lord Alaric, the local baron, a staunch supporter of Father Thomas, whose lands encircled the village and whose authority was absolute. You taste the metallic tang of pure, unadulterated fear. This was not just a powerful man. This was the very embodiment of the system that sought to eradicate Ilara and her kind. To heal him, if successful, would be a monumental act of defiance. You feel the cold sweat clinging to Ilara's back as she stared at the messenger, his body convulsing, the dark buboes beneath his jaw pulsing with an ominous life of their own. 99% of people would recognize the terrifying marks of the plague. What they don't know, however, is that during medieval plague outbreaks, a significant number of so-called witches or herbalists were actively sought out by the wealthy elite, even as the Church condemned them. This was a hidden conspiracy, a dark truth of hypocrisy, where necessity overruled dogma in the face of death. Who is your master? To refuse would be to let another die, to abandon the very purpose of her life's work. You feel the immense pressure, the moral dilemma that transcends time. The central mystery sharpens. Who is this powerful master seeking forbidden help? And what will be the price for Ilara to intervene in a case where even official physicians fled in terror? The gold coins, gleaming dully on the earthen floor, felt like lead weights, each one a silent demand, a promise of both reward and profound danger. This was a direct request from someone of significant means, perhaps even the local lord or a wealthy merchant, a secret truth revealing the hypocrisy of the ruling class who condemned hedge witches publicly while secretly seeking their forbidden cures. Ilara felt the weight of the gold, not as a temptation, but as a chilling confirmation of her growing danger. To save this man's master would be to expose herself to the highest powers, to bring the eye of the Inquisition directly upon her. The distinctive angry swellings of buboes were visible beneath his jawline, a terrifying mark that shattered any illusion of safety. This was not the common sweating sickness. This was the Black Death itself, raging and merciless. "My master," he gasped, his voice raspy. He is afflicted. He sends for the wise woman." His hand, trembling violently, held out a small, heavy purse, spilling a few glinting gold coins onto the floor. Gold, in a medieval hovel. This was not the desperation of a common peasant. As the door swung open a gust of cold, damp air swept into the hovel, carrying with it the sickeningly sweet scent of putrefaction. Your nose recoils from the smell, a grim reminder of the plague's pervasive grip. A man stumbled inside, collapsing onto the earthen floor, his body racked by violent shivers. He was not a villager Ilara recognized. His clothes were finer, though now torn and smeared with mud and something else. His face was flushed crimson, his eyes bloodshot and unfocused, pupils dilated to pinpricks. Ilara, her eyes wide, gestured for Marta to stay hidden with the sick child. She moved towards the door, her steps light and cautious. The faint creak of the old wooden latch was loud in the suffocating silence. What they don't want you to know is that medieval communities were often riddled with internal conflicts and clandestine dealings, far beyond the official church narratives. Hidden conspiracies, not just against herbalists, but against anyone who disrupted the fragile social order, were rampant. The frantic scratching at the door escalated into a desperate thumping, punctuated by choked gasps and frantic whispers. You feel the cold terror seize Ilara and Marta, a shared dread that permeated the very mud walls of the hovel. 99% of people, if they heard such a sound in the dead of a medieval night, would assume a demon, or perhaps desperate bandits. But Ilara's gut instinct, honed by years of witnessing human suffering, knew this was a plea for help, a desperate cry against the inevitable. But the silence was broken not by the child's cough, but by a sudden frantic scratching at the door. Not the measured knock of a villager, nor the authoritative rap of Father Thomas, but a desperate, animalistic scrabbling. Ilara and Marta exchanged a terrified glance. Your heart jumps, a frantic bird against your ribs. The central mystery broadens. What new threat has arrived at their door? And how much longer can Ilara's forbidden knowledge remain a secret in a world so intent on erasing it? "He needs to sweat," Ilara murmured, her voice a low hum. Deep, cleansing sweat. She began to gather more mugwort, along with yarrow and meadowsweet, preparing a strong decoction for a steam inhalation. The rustle of dried leaves, like 1,000 tiny whispers, fills the hovel. The steam, when it finally rose, would carry the essence of these potent plants into the child's lungs, clearing the pathways that had become choked with sickness. You feel the warm, damp air on your face, the healing steam, a fragrant mist in the cold, unyielding reality of their lives. Ilara knew the power of careful observation, a skill honed by generations of herbalists. She meticulously noted the child's symptoms, the subtle shifts in his breathing, the texture of his skin. This wasn't some random potion, it was proto-diagnostic medicine. The historical fact is that while university-trained doctors relied on astrology and the four humors, village healers often performed what we would recognize as early clinical trials, carefully tracking results. They had documented success rates, particularly with specific botanical remedies against plague symptoms that often shamed the bleeders and purgers of official medicine. The child still burned, but the harsh, dry cough had softened, and a faint flush of color had returned to his pallid cheeks. Marta, exhausted but resolute, sat by his side, her gaze fixed on Ilara. You taste the dry fear at the back of your throat, knowing that every passing hour either brought them closer to triumph or to the pyre. Ilara herself looked gaunt, her eyes shadowed with worry, but a flicker of the old defiance still burned within them. This battle against sickness was a battle against ignorance, a fight to keep ancient wisdom from being extinguished. 99% of the village, if asked, would attribute any recovery to God's mercy or Father Thomas's prayers. They would never acknowledge the bitter, earthy liquid Ilara had given the boy, the forbidden knowledge extracted from the earth. What they don't want you to know is that this precise, empirical approach to medicine was not unique. Across medieval Europe, hidden networks of herbalists quietly shared their wisdom, often communicating in coded language or through symbols. Their secrets protecting not just their lives, but centuries of accumulated botanical science. 2 days had passed in agonizing suspense. If he did not, the consequences would be dire for Ilara, and perhaps for Marta too, for seeking forbidden aid. The central mystery intensified. How many more lives could Ilara save? And how long until her quiet rebellion ignited a full-blown inquisition? The air in Ilara's hovel was thick with the scent of simmering herbs and the fragile breath of a child, teetering between life and death. You feel the dampness of the boy's skin as Ilara gently presses a cool compress of infused calendula to his feverish brow. The soft, wet sound, a comfort in the hushed tension. The air in the hovel filled with the pungent, earthy scent of the brewing remedy, a stark contrast to the cloying incense of the cathedral that Marta had just left, where prayers were offered, but no true healing found. As Ilara gently administered the bitter liquid to the child, Marta watched, her eyes wide with a desperate hope that mirrored your own. You feel the precarious balance of their lives, held between the fear of the church and the desperate need for a cure. If the child recovered, it would be another defiant whisper against Father Thomas's condemnations. This wasn't magic. It was proto-epidemiology. Ilara moved with purpose, her salvaged fragments of the herbal guiding her. She crushed dried willow bark, a natural source of salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin, though it wouldn't be discovered by modern medicine for centuries, into a fine powder. The gritty sound against the mortar and pestle was a rhythmic drumbeat of ancient wisdom. She mixed it with honey and a strong decoction of mugwort, a potent febrifuge and immune stimulant. You watch her precise movements, knowing that every step is a silent act of rebellion. This wasn't just a simple illness. This was the sweating sickness, the same plague that had claimed so many. What they don't want you to know is the shocking truth about how these hedge witches often had superior knowledge of contagion and sanitation compared to the learned physicians of the era. While physicians blamed humors and demons, herbalists instinctively understood the importance of isolating the sick and using fumigants. Archaeological evidence, often dismissed as folk superstition, reveals specific botanical remedies, like mugwort or elderberry concoctions, used effectively against plague symptoms. A shocking statistic given the era's medical illiteracy. But Ilara carried a different burden, a sacred duty to the hidden truths of the earth. "Bring him to the fire," Ilara said, her voice low and steady, a surprising strength in her tone that cut through the fear. The flickering candlelight cast her face in sharp relief, shadows dancing across her high cheekbones. Marta, relief washing over her face, stumbled forward, placing the child gently onto a straw mat near the hearth. The boy's skin was hot and dry to your touch, his little body trembling with fever. The small salvaged pages of the herbal lie scattered on the floor, whispering ancient secrets of survival. What would she do? The child's whimper, thin and reedy, pierced the heavy silence of the hovel. You feel the desperate clench in Ilara's stomach, a familiar knot of dread and fierce resolve. To turn Marta away would be to condemn the boy. To help him would be to spit in the face of Father Thomas's threats, risking the pyre for both herself and her neighbor. 99% of people, in such an age of terror and rigid belief, would choose self-preservation. They say it's God's will, but I saw what you did for your mother. The central mystery takes a sharp turn. Ilara had just been publicly shamed, her knowledge attacked. To help Marta meant a direct act of defiance, risking not only her own life, but potentially Marta's too, for seeking her aid. But to refuse was to abandon a child to death, to betray her grandmother's legacy, to let the Church's fear triumph over life itself. You feel the crushing weight of this impossible choice. Ilara froze, her breath catching in her throat, her eyes wide with renewed fear. Had they returned? Had her meager salvage been discovered? Your heart pounds a frantic rhythm against your ribs. The memory of the metal taste of fear from earlier today floods back. The door creaked open, revealing not a priest, but the small, frightened face of Ilara's neighbor, Marta, clutching her own feverish child. Marta's eyes, red-rimmed and desperate, pleaded silently. "My boy, Ilara, he burns," she whispered, her voice barely audible, like dry leaves skittering across the ground. It was a small, almost insignificant detail, yet in its meticulous instructions lay the very essence of the lost wisdom, a testament to observational science, long before it was called science. The scratching sound of her fingernail, tracing the faded script, is the only sound in the oppressive silence. She thought of the sick, of the children who still suffered despite Father Thomas's sermons and the village's fervent prayers. Their pleas, though unspoken, were a powerful counterforce to the Church's threats. A faint scratching sound at the door, lighter than Father Thomas's assault, startled you. These weren't mere superstitions. These were sophisticated instructions for remedies that had a documented success rate against diseases, a fact often buried by church scribes who focused solely on miracles. Modern connections abound. The way marginalized communities still preserve traditional knowledge despite systemic pressures to abandon it. Ilara's hands, usually so steady and confident, now trembled as she reread a passage on the preparation of a feverfew poultice for migraines. They would have bowed to the crushing weight of the Church's authority, accepted their fate, and ceased their practices. But Ilara carried not just her grandmother's legacy, but the silent hopes of the village. She had managed to salvage a few torn pages of the herbal, their edges ragged, the ink faded, but the knowledge within still potent. What they don't want you to know is that this act of salvaging, of secretly preserving fragments of forbidden knowledge, was a common, dangerous practice among medieval herbalists. The central mystery now deepened. How would she fight back against such a powerful, pervasive force? How would she preserve what little remained of this forbidden truth? The night was a vast, inky silence, broken only by the shivering whisper of the wind through the cracks in the hovel walls. You feel the chill seep into your bones, a physical manifestation of the despair that gripped Ilara. The hovel, once a sanctuary of healing, now felt like a tomb, permeated by the stale scent of crushed herbs and shattered dreams. 99% of people would have given up as they finally exited the hovel, leaving behind a scene of desecrated knowledge and palpable fear. The heavy oak door groaned shut with a sound like a coffin lid. You're left alone with the wreckage, the bitter scent of scattered herbs, and the chilling realization that the systematic eradication of this life-saving knowledge was a deliberate act, an ancient conspiracy against the people it claimed to protect. Alara sank to her knees amidst the scattered remnants of her grandmother's wisdom, her hands trembling as she gathered a few unbroken sprigs of mugwort. The book, what remained of it, was clutched tightly in Father Thomas's hand, a trophy of his righteousness. "You will cease these practices, Alara," he declared, his voice booming with renewed authority, "or you will face the full judgment of the Church." His eyes, dark as peat, burned into hers, a silent threat of the pyre. You feel the cold dread of knowing that in this age, such threats were not idle. A medieval accusation of witchcraft, even for healing, was often a death sentence. What they don't want you to know is that many of the so-called medical miracles of the saints were often directly preceded by the quiet, unacknowledged work of a local herbalist. The Church would then step in, claim the cure as divine intervention, and simultaneously denounce the actual healer. It was a sophisticated system of social proof designed to reinforce their power and discredit any independent source of healing. Modern connections are undeniable. The way certain health narratives are controlled and demonized today to protect established interests. "That book," she managed, her voice a raw whisper. "It holds cures, Father. It saves lives." He laughed, a dry, humorless rasp that scraped against the stone walls. "It holds heresy. It holds the devil's whispers, tempting souls away from true faith." He tossed the shredded pages to the floor, where they settled like discarded prayers amongst the trampled herbs. The metallic taste of ash and defeat fills your mouth. You watch, horrified, as Father Thomas's fingers, thick and unfeeling, continue to rip pages from Alara's grandmother's herbal. Each tear is a wound to forgotten wisdom, a deliberate erasure of a life-saving secret. 99% of people never learn the true extent of this historical vandalism. Entire libraries of practical botanical knowledge were destroyed, rebranded as witchcraft, all to maintain the Church's narrative of divine omnipotence and its monopoly on healing. Alara's face, etched with despair, was a mirror for the grief you felt. This wasn't just a book. It was a lineage, a trust, a weapon against death. The loss of the book was not just a personal blow. It was a devastating erasure of history, a deliberate suppression of life-saving wisdom. The sound of tearing parchment, a soft but deadly rip, echoes in your ears as Father Thomas's heavy thumb carelessly tears a page. The future of this vital knowledge and Alara's own life now hangs by the thinnest of threads. What will become of the book, and what desperate measures will Alara take to reclaim her legacy? A tearing sound of the parchment, fragile as a butterfly's wing, still shrieked in your memory. The wood scraped harshly as he forced it open, revealing the aged parchment within. "I knew it! The devil's handiwork!" He didn't understand that this was the very archaeological evidence often dismissed as folk superstition, revealing specific botanical remedies like mugwort or elderberry concoctions used effectively against plague symptoms. A shocking statistic. These humble herbalists had documented success rates that often shamed the bleeders and purgers of the official Church physicians. This forbidden knowledge, passed down through generations, was systematically eradicated. Alara felt a cold dread seep into her bones, replacing the fiery defiance. This box, carved with ancient symbols, contained Alara's most precious, most dangerous possession, her grandmother's book of shadows. Not a book of spells, but a meticulously kept herbal, detailing remedies, dosages, and success rates, complete with lunar cycles for harvesting. This was proto-pharmacology at its finest, a scientific ledger disguised as folk magic. Its pages, fragile as autumn leaves, held secrets that changed everything about how medieval diseases were fought. Father Thomas stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with triumphant malice. "A grimoire," he hissed, snatching the box. "Modern connections are clear. How often do institutions discredit natural cures that can't be patented? Not because they are ineffective, but because they threaten profits and established power structures." "What is this?" the second man grunted, his voice gruff, as he pulled a small, intricately carved wooden box from beneath a stack of worn linens. "Your breath catches in your throat." Ilara stood rigid, her gaze fixed on the man who was now tearing apart a small, woven basket of dried lavender, its delicate floral scent filling the air, a stark contrast to the brutality unfolding. She knew what they sought, not merely evidence of witchcraft, but anything that signified independent knowledge, a power source outside the church's reach. This was a direct assault on lost wisdom, on ancient techniques that bypassed the costly and often ineffective interventions of the official medical establishment. One of them, a burly man with hands like ham hocks, kicked over a bucket filled with rainwater, the wet sloshing sound echoing ominously in the small space. 99% of people would assume the church's motives were purely spiritual. But the truth is darker. Their fear of the hedge witch was economic and political. Every successful cure Ilara performed chipped away at the church's authority, their monopoly on solace and salvation, and their control over the grieving families who paid for masses and blessings. The small, worn leather pouch tied around her waist, containing a few carefully dried mandrake leaves, felt suddenly heavy, a dangerous secret resting against her skin. Would they find it? And what would happen if they did? The air grew thick with the metallic tang of fear and something else, the faint, sweet smell of rotting thatch dripping onto the hearth. You feel the gritty dust of the disturbed hovel floor between your teeth as Father Thomas's men continued their ransacking. Yet, the memory of her mother's strong, even breath, saved by her hands, was a fiery ember in her soul. She could not betray that trust, that knowledge. As the burly men continued their search, overturning baskets, their hands roughly probing the corners of her small home, you feel the cold sweat bead on your brow. They were searching for something specific, something that would provide undeniable proof of her witchcraft. A hidden book, a strange tool, perhaps even an animal bone, any evidence to confirm their manufactured narrative. He ignored the fact that young Thomas's previous child had survived a similar fever thanks to Ilara's elderberry. You taste the bitterness of injustice, a flavor that has persisted across centuries. The church's narrative was simple. Sickness was a divine judgment, and only divine intercession, channeled through their priests, could offer solace, if not cure. This conveniently overlooked the abysmal success rates of their own sanctioned physicians, whose bleedings and purges often hastened death. Ilara knew the risk. Practicing these arts meant risking torture and the pyre. It was a secret weapon against the unseen enemies that ravaged the medieval gut, a hidden truth that modern science has rediscovered through ethnobotanical studies. What they don't want you to know is that many folk remedies were not superstition, but empirical science, observed and refined over centuries. The fever that took young Thomas's babe, Father Thomas continued, his voice now laced with a false sympathy, was God's will, not a failure of prayer, and certainly not a lack of your concoctions. This wasn't merely about doctrine. It was a deliberate campaign, a hidden conspiracy by the Church to consolidate all power, spiritual, social, and yes, even medical, under its direct command. Ilara watched him, her face a mask of stone, though inside, a tempest raged. The methodical destruction was not just an act of petty cruelty. It was an attempt to erase her lineage, her connection to a forbidden wisdom. She remembered her grandmother's teaching. Mugwort, not just a common roadside weed, but a powerful carminative, an emmenagogue, a remedy for parasitic worms. You hear the sharp crackle of drying leaves under Father Thomas's heavy boot as he deliberately ground a bundle of mugwort into the earth floor. This, he announced, his voice devoid of compassion, is not God's way. This is temptation. 99% of people in the village, terrified of eternal damnation, would agree. But a few, the ones whose children still lived thanks to Ilara's remedies, harbored a dangerous doubt. As Father Thomas's men began to systematically, almost casually, sweep her carefully arranged herbs to the floor, the dry rustle and crack of crushed leaves felt like a physical blow. You watch as generations of collected wisdom, of life-saving secrets, are reduced to scattered debris. The central mystery now intensifies. How will she protect not just herself, but the ancient knowledge she carries from total annihilation? The dust from the fallen herbs still hung in the air, catching the weak shafts of sunlight that pierced the grimy window. He wasn't just talking about her. He was talking about the community's trust in her rather than the Church. You feel the slow, tightening knot of anxiety in your stomach, a primitive fear of authority that still resonates today when established powers try to discredit natural wellness. Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She knew the consequences for defying the Church. For practicing these arts meant risking torture and the pyre. But families secretly sought her out, their desperate pleas a stronger pull than fear. Forgotten medieval herbals, hidden in private collections, reveal that these witches were not invoking spirits, but applying sophisticated empirical knowledge. For example, specific elderberry concoctions were indeed used effectively against plague symptoms, a shocking statistic given the era's medical illiteracy. This was proto-pharmacology, not sorcery, and it shamed the bleeders and purgers whose own success rates were abysmal. The father's gaze hardened. God's gifts, or the devil's temptations? He sneered, his voice dropping to a low growl. These remedies you peddle, they bring suspicion. They bring questions. You hear the crisp rustle of his cassock as he takes a step inside, the heavy leather of his boots crunching on loose straw. The sound is an invasion. 99% of people would cower, but Ilara's grandmother had taught her to face the storm. I use what God has given us, Father, Ilara replied, her voice steady. The plants that grow from his earth. She gestured to a small vial of elderberry tincture, newly prepared. This was not just a defiant act. It was a truth archaeologists have recently reconfirmed. Father Thomas stood silhouetted in the doorway, his broad form filling the space, casting a long, accusatory shadow across Ilara's earthen floor. Behind him, two burly men, their faces grim and unsmiling, held staffs. Ilara, his voice was deceptively calm, like a smooth river hiding jagged rocks. The parish has heard tales of unorthodox healings. His eyes, cold as winter stones, swept over the hanging bundles of herbs, the small clay pots. The very air thick with the memory of potent remedies. You feel a prickle of ice down your spine, the sudden, sharp scent of wood smoke from the nearby hearth, now tainted with a metallic edge of alarm. Ilara knew instantly, this was not a request for healing. This was an inquiry. What they don't want you to know is that the Church's systematic eradication of herbal knowledge wasn't just about dogma. It was about maintaining control over the populace, ensuring that all power, including the power to heal, flowed through their sanctioned channels. What will she tell them? Can she risk helping others, knowing each successful cure further draws the eye of the powerful, the envious, and the righteous? The small clay pot, still warm from the decoction, sits on the table, a silent testament to a life saved and a death deferred. But for how long? The knock at the hovel door was not the hesitant, hopeful tap of a sick villager. It was a firm, almost demanding rap that vibrated through the mud and wattle walls, shaking loose a fine dust of dried straw. The sun will soon creep over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and pale gold. With it comes the villagers, desperate for news, some with their own fevers starting, their faces etched with a fear you recognize too well. They will look at Ilara with a mixture of hope and terror. They know what she does. They also know the whispers from Father Thomas. The cold stone of the nearby cathedral, still slick with morning dew, seemed to pulse with judgment. You feel the weight of their gaze on your back, an invisible burden. Ilara's mother had finally slipped into a deep, fever-breaking sleep, her breathing evening out into a soft, regular rhythm that was music to your ears. The relief that washed over Ilara was so profound, it made her knees weak. You taste the sudden, overwhelming sweetness of hope after bitter fear. But this success, this quiet defiance of the prevailing medical illiteracy, was also a dangerous secret. It confirmed her grandmother's teachings, that true healing lay not in the Church's prayers alone, nor in the bleedings of the barber surgeons, but in the earth itself. Archaeological digs, often dismissed as mere folk superstition, have uncovered caches of specific botanical remedies in ancient homesteads. These weren't random weeds. They were carefully selected, stored, and prepared plants like elderberry, willow bark, and mugwort, evidence of a highly sophisticated, if unwritten, proto-pharmacology. This level of practical medical knowledge, often passed down through a lineage of women, was systematically eradicated by the Church. Much like modern institutions discredit natural cures that can't be patented if they threaten their established medical dogma. It was not just about control, it was about power over life and death itself. 99% of people would have given up when the fever seemed to tighten its grip, but Ilara remembers her grandmother's iron will. You can feel the residue of her mother's labored breath on your own skin, the memory of her weak swallows of the bitter liquid. The night was a black velvet shroud outside the small, unglazed window, pierced only by the distant, mournful hoot of an owl, a sound that, for many, signaled ill omen, but for Ilara was merely the song of the forest. The warmth emanating from the brewing liquid, is the only comfort in the cold, unyielding reality of their lives. If this fails, she is not only a grieving daughter, but also a target. The local priest, Father Thomas, with his beady eyes and a nose for heresy, has already begun his rounds, his voice booming condemnations over the freshly dug graves. You can almost feel his gaze burning into the thin walls of the hovel. The pungent aroma of the elderberry decoction still clung to Alara's fingers, even after she had scrubbed them raw with river water and ash. The soft rustle of dried leaves, like a whisper in the night, fills the small hovel as she measures a handful of dried elderberry into it, along with a pinch of meadowsweet. The knowledge isn't written in scrolls, it's etched into her memory, passed down from woman to woman, a sacred trust against a world intent on forgetting. You watch her, a silent observer in a desperate drama, as she prepares the decoction, the steam rising, carrying the scent of wild summer. It was a world where every cough could be a death knell. But Alara knew a secret. She knew the power of elderberry, not just for flavoring wine, but as a potent febrifuge capable of calming the raging heat in the body. Archaeologists, digging through monastic texts and forgotten herbals, now confirm what the church tried to suppress. Concoctions like elderberry were indeed documented for their success against fever and inflammation, often outperforming the useless purges prescribed by learned and largely ignorant physicians. She grabs a small clay pot, her movements precise despite the tremor in her hands. The raw scent of fear hangs heavy in the air, a metallic tang that mixes with the faint, sweet smell of decay already beginning to creep from the village. Alara's mother coughs, a wet, rattling sound, her breath shallow. You feel a tremor of cold dread, an ancient fear of contagion that mirrors our modern anxieties about unseen viruses. Medieval people, with their limited understanding of disease, were truly at the mercy of the elements. A startling 97% of medieval children never lived to see their 5th birthday. A statistic that makes your gut clench. Her grandmother, Alara's namesake, had taught her the true language of the forest, a tongue the church deemed heresy. "They call us witches, child." The old woman's voice, raspy like dry leaves, echoes in your mind. Because we listen to what God put in the soil, not just what they preach from the pulpit. Your fingers instinctively trace the rough texture of the dried burdock root hanging above you, a memory of a lesson from years past. It was the same fever that had taken 3 children from the village within a fortnight. 99% of the village believes it's the devil's work, a punishment from God. You hear the panicked whimpers from the straw pallet in the corner, a sound that scrapes against your bones like dry knuckles on parchment. Alara, barely a woman, knows better. She knows it's the sweating sickness, a contagion brought by the autumn rains, and she knows her mother's life hangs on a thread no thicker than the spider silk weaving between the rafters. It helps more than you know. Drop a comment with the medieval fact that surprised you most, or what role you think you'd play if you were born in the year 1287. Let's begin and live the life they never got to finish. But be warned, some truths about the past are harder to forget than others. The thing in the well wasn't supposed to be human, but the fever-gripping little Alara's mother made her see shadows dance even in the midday sun. And it was systematically eradicated, much like modern institutions discredit natural cures that can't be patented. Your skin crawls as whispers of their success echo from the shadows, making you wonder what other life-saving knowledge was deliberately suppressed. The emotional stakes were immense. Practicing these arts meant risking torture and the pyre. Yet families secretly sought out these healers. This is a secret history, written in the soil, the plants, and the blood of those who dared to heal. If you love immersive, real storytelling about survival, belief, and forgotten lives, hit like and subscribe. This is the world of the Hedge Witch, a title spat with fear and reverence, never truly understood. She is not a sorceress, but a master of life and death, her hands stained green from remedies that shame the very physicians who condemn her. Her success rates against the plague itself are whispered like heresy, a shocking statistic given the era's medical illiteracy. What they don't want you to know is that this wasn't black magic. It was proto-pharmacology, a precise, effective science passed down through generations. The single beeswax candle gutters on a rough-hewn table, its flame casting dancing shadows that twist the dried herbs hanging from the rafters into grotesque, watchful faces. The metallic scent of a recent, potent decoction still lingers, a faint echo of human sickness and desperate hope. You've never seen a toothbrush. You believe demons live in fog. Your town blames goats for the plague. Welcome to the Middle Ages. But the story you're about to live defies every history book you've ever opened. 99% of people believe medieval medicine was all leeches and prayer. They're wrong. The truth about a forbidden cure, systematically erased by the church, will chill you to the bone. But be warned, some truths about the past are harder to forget than others. By the end, you'll never trust medieval history again, because the greatest secrets lie buried beneath centuries of deliberate deceit. The central conspiracy? That survival during humanity's darkest hour depended on breaking every sacred rule. If you love immersive, real storytelling about survival, belief, and forgotten lives, hit like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. Drop a comment with the medieval fact that surprised you most. Or what role you think you'd play if you were born in the year 1287. Let's begin and live the life they never got to finish. This wasn't some mystical incantation, but a radical, empirical approach to medicine, deemed heretical because it worked. What they don't want you to know is that effective treatments existed, hidden by the very institutions sworn to protect life. This cover-up isn't just a historical curiosity. It's a blueprint for modern institutional lies, mirroring how today powerful entities suppress alternative solutions that threaten their established control. You feel the metallic taste of fear coating your tongue as you realize the official narrative was designed to keep you ignorant. You watch a cart piled high with bodies rumble past, the wet thump of each corpse hitting the wooden planks, a sound that carves itself into your soul. You've never seen a toothbrush. You believe demons live in fog. Your town blames goats for the plague. Welcome to the Middle Ages, while prayers and processions filled the streets, offering no solace against the omnipresent specter of death. A forbidden knowledge was whispered in the shadows, passed between those desperate enough to defy the Church's rigid doctrines. 99% of people think medieval peasants were stupid, blindly accepting fate during the Black Death. The truth will shatter everything you believe about the past. Imagine, the sweet, sick smell of rotting flesh permeates the very air you breathe. The sound of constant coughing and distant screams echoes through narrow alleyways. Your lungs burn with every shallow breath, fear a metallic taste coating your tongue. The pervasive stench of death clings to your clothes, to your skin, a constant reminder of what's coming.